Council work session. It's 12:42, Tuesday, March 7th. We're convened in the City Conference Center. I'd also like to point out that we have concluded that the last work meeting was adjourned by unanimous consent. So, this meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo City Council, where we'll also be available for on-demand viewing. Please be aware that the microphones in the room pick up the noise of paper and other rustling objects. Further, be aware that the microphones can pick up side conversations. So let's start with the roll call. Mr. Parker, can you start here?
Yes, Wayne Parker, George Stewart,
Kim Santiago, Kelsey Zarbach.
Dave Sewell,
Dave Connect.
Gary Winterton,
David Hardy. Caitlin, Brian Jones.
Thank you. The opening prayer will be provided by Travis Ball from Provo City.
Our Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for this opportunity we have to meet here in this work session. We're thankful for this great community program. I pray that as we discuss items of the city, that we'll be able to learn and we'll be able to make good decisions, and that we'll be able to move the community forward and make good decisions for the community, or for the citizens of Provo. We say in Jesus Christ.
Thank you. We see we have some minutes from February 7th. I believe that there was an email earlier about some corrections that those have been made. Are there any other corrections that need to be made to the minutes?
I didn't actually see them. I just, it was a sentence that wasn't.
If you'd like, I can read what the correction is.
You might just want to read
Yeah.
that, and I didn't see the red one.
This is for the February 7th.
How you doing?
minutes. And
Here.
I know.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah, that's
And
fine.
Item number 7, which was an
your
update
best friend's daughter.
regarding the citywide economic development strategic plan. So there was just a partial sentence.
My son
So
last
that
night. Tell me, like
Mr.
all
Holmes
these
mentioned that
discussions
some of
we've
these
had, and
spaces
I'm
have been
realizing,
converted back to residential
this
uses.
kill, right?
The challenges
It's kind of shocking.
Congratulations.
in our village have been
Somewhere in there.
have been or are
Yeah.
difficult to identify.
Okay, if there are no further concerns about the minutes, I will approve by unanimous consent.
Okay.
Let's move on to the next item of business, which is a discussion on opt-out policy for our new AMI school.
Great, thank you, Council Chair and Council. Appreciate this opportunity to talk to you about the opt-out policy. Frankly, I've been trying to avoid this. We didn't want to get into this policy just because we'd hope that everybody would want the meter and take it. But as you see, this is a deployment map of some of the AMI meters. Everything in green are meters that have been deployed. There are red in there. Those are the meters that are ready to be deployed. And then there's a few purple. Right now that stands at 21 customers who have refused to take a meter. So out of 15,000 plus customers, there's been 21 that have said they don't want a meter for different types of concerns. And so I thought I'd kind of give you a base of where we've come from on the AMI. Can you put that presentation on?
Yeah.
And kind of give you where this started and what we propose, what was talked about in the Energy Board and what the Energy Board recommends. So the AMI history, there's health concerns, some privacy concerns with AMI meters, in particular with the electrical industry. AMI advantages. Is it starting? It doesn't matter, you can have the things on the side. That's okay. This will work. You get the gist. Frankly, we started this back in 2014 when we made the presentation to the Energy Board, made the presentation to the Council. That's when we discussed some of the AMI advantages. We talked to the neighborhood chairs. Then we went to every neighborhood. We tried to talk to them. We started in September 2014. Our last neighborhood meeting was March 2016, so we tried to get all the neighborhoods to discuss this issue. You can see some of the deployment. After we deployed the pilot program, about 1,000, we went through a bunch of testing to make sure it worked. There's a lot of things to work out, trying to get the data to work with our billing system. And so it took about a year to make sure that everything was going to work. And then in the fall of last year, after we got all the kinks worked out, we started deploying. We hired some local installers, and they've been installing that ever since. Which is interesting. By hiring local, we saved $1 million on this project. I think that is a big win for us, because we would have had to pay taxes, and it was going to cost us about $600,000 if we had a.
It's on a split screen, so.
So if we had a contractor who gave us a bid at $600,000, we would have to pay about $400,000 to pay for the taxes to install those meters. By doing it ourselves, we saved that $1 million. We pay each installer about $3 per meter, and so they're incentivized to get out there, get the work done, and it's worked out for us. So from about a little over $1 million to $100,000 to install.
Help me understand why you would pay 40% tax.
Because the project was about a little over $6 million, so we would have had to pay. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you have a contractor install something for you, you have to pay. It's not tax exempt, so you have to pay sales tax. So even on every meter is $135, we would have had to pay tax on every one of those meters. So that was an alarming thing to get over.
What training does a person have to install?
We have our meter technician go out with them for 2 weeks. First, the six trainings, and then they go out in the field with them for 2 weeks, and then they make sure that they can do it properly. They have PPI, and then they go out and then do it. So I'm sorry. I will tell you, when we first started this, there were some letters going around to the community, and some pretty interesting things in the letter, some scare tactics. And so we got some of those letters. We actually went and had meetings with them directly. After we got done talking with them, they ended up taking the AMI meter. And that's the way it has for most of the customers. They'll hear these concerns, they get on the internet, we go talk to them personally, and they end up taking them. But there's a few out there now that are refusing.
Travis, can you give us a comparison to an AMI meter and a cell phone?
Yes, it's these meters transmit less than a minute every day, and the signal is much weaker than a cell phone. And so I will show you on that. This was the letter that was going around. We had a neighborhood meeting because the whole neighborhood was getting involved. We went and talked to them, kind of settled down the issues. These are some of the things that have come out from studies. The American Cancer Society exposure to RF energy for smart meters is estimated much less than typical exposure people receive for cell phones, cordless phones, and/or Wi-Fi routers. Food and Drug Administration, the same thing. I was talking about Idaho Falls Power last week, and they installed an AMI system. She said they did a study, and they said if you talked on the phone for a half hour a day, it'd be the same as putting your head against the meter and sitting there for 350 years. So that's kind of how they compare that. That's what they said. After that concern, we hired a professor up at BYU to look at the technology. He came back and said the same thing. Their health risks due to AMI are negligible. And if there's security concerns, we can't sell this information to anybody. This is very private information. It's not being used for anything there. The great thing about this is there's some benefits to it, right? We get a return on investment by putting the meters out there. We didn't increase any of our utility bills because of it. We've been budgeting for this for about 15 years, saving up the money to deploy it. And for the customer, they can see how they use energy. They can use that for conservation themselves. That's what we think the big advantage of this is. So if a customer calls into 311, they want to know what's going on their bill, we can see 15-minute increments of how people are using energy. If they complain about a high bill, we can tell them when they're using the most energy. And they can look at this, they'll be able to look at this on their cell phone. They can control their own energy. Remote metering, we don't have employees that will go up in the backyards anymore. Disconnects. We don't have to send people out to do that. It can be instantaneous. Power quality, if the power goes out at a home, it'll automatically send that to our dispatch center. They don't have to call. We'll know the power's out before the customer. Sometimes we get complaints that when they're gone on vacation, they lose their meat in the freezer because we didn't go fix it. We didn't know about it. Now we will know about it and we can take action on those things. And one thing that we haven't talked about is we take vehicles off the road because we don't have to send out meter readers. We don't have to send out field service techs. And so as we calculated that, that's for us is 20,000 pounds of coal that we're taking away just by not having the people on the road. And we think that's an advantage. So it gets down to this opt-out. There's a few things that we want to be eligible. We want it to be the owner of the home, and they must sign the opt-out form. And I think you guys have that in your packet. You can see the customers that will not be eligible as policy is if they have a history of meter tampering, if it's a 3-phase or multi-phase, if they change their name more than 2 times within a year, if they have a disconnect notice, and if the meter is inaccessible to read. And some of the, Kim?
What do you mean by polyphase?
It's more than one. It's a commercial customer, 3-phase customer.
Oh, okay.
So it's a large customer.
So they can't choose to opt out because they're too complicated, or?
Right, and it's a business.
Yeah.
What it is. So this is for residential customers. And as we went through this with the Energy Board, they recommended this on February 13th.
Changes in 12 months.
That was something Karen's here, and she can tell you.
Well, it's not a name change.
Yeah.
You can go change your name all you want, but it has to do with the transition of landlord-tenant situations. If that's an active situation going on, and then the tenant comes in and they want the meter, or the landlord doesn't want the meter, you can't keep going back and forth and changing the meter out per the request of the landlord or the tenant. Does that make sense?
So what we're asking for this is to implement a opt-out fee. And that would be for us to send someone out to read the meter, come back and send the paperwork over to the billing office. As we calculate that, we figured it would be about 20 minutes to read the meter, 10 minutes out, 10 minutes back. And the cost for us is $25. And that's the fee that we're recommending. The other fees are the fees that are already in the consolidated fee schedule, the processing fee, connection fee. Those are if after the implementation of this system, if they want to take it off, and then we would charge them a fee to put another meter out. I didn't charge them for an old electromechanical because we have thousands of them, right? I'm not paying for those. We'll have a lot of those on site, so I didn't put those in. But if they decide to go out of the system, the AMI, and then they want us to put it back on, then I'm going to have to charge them the $135 for the meter. That's what the cost is, plus the processing fee and connection fee. Those fees are already on the schedule. The only thing that I need approved is the opt-out fee, which would be the $25 per month to send someone out to read the meter and process that read.
Let me just emphasize, it's an attempt to cover costs, but you can see it 10 minutes out and 10 minutes back. This is a very minimal portion of the cost recovery. There's very little other administration, and probably in your most effective situation, you can go out there and get back in 20 minutes. So it really is light from a perspective of covering the fee.
It's important to note too that there are other services that have to be rendered by meter readers, like turning on or turning off. If you have a disconnect notice or something like that, there could be more than one truck roll a month, I guess is kind of the bottom line. And we're just saying we'll absorb those if we're getting the one, essentially covering the cost of one truck roll a month.
Are they read, are the meters generally read at the same time each month?
Right now they're not. We have how many cycles? What's that?
21 billing cycles.
21 times. So there will be, when we get the system out, we're trying to decrease the amount of reads. So what we're thinking about going to 4, isn't that right, Karen? So there'll be a lot less. But when this person has to go out, there will be a certain time each month that they'll have to go and get the read.
When you said each home is read at the same time every month?
Not exactly.
Within days?
Within days, depending on if a holiday or a weekend situation.
Because my billing always shows a continuous 30-day, 31-day, 28-day cycle?
The reading dates is usually between 28 to 33 days of service.
Just looking at your map, if those who have, was it 25 or so that hit, for someone to do a circuit, I mean, yeah, if it's 20 minutes out, 20 minutes back, 20 minutes out, but hopefully we wouldn't be doing that. We would be doing a circuit.
Right. And we'll see. We don't think, when we look at these, many of these that are on the purple wouldn't qualify for the system, right? Because they've had multiple disconnect orders. More than half have. A lot of them aren't owners. So when you get down to it, I don't think there's going to be the 21 that will choose to
How
do
many,
this.
Travis?
What's that?
How many?
Well, I think the last time we checked, there was 18 that would not qualify and 3 that would qualify out of the 21.
There's 3 people that pay $25.
I've had one really sincere person say that he's willing to pay the $25 and he would do it because he feels like his wife is sensitive to radio waves.
On the late AMI installation fees, how does that compare with what people are being charged they're installing now?
They're not being charged because it's part of our CIP, it's part of our capital improvement. They're not being charged for a meter now. But if they opt out and they pay the $25 for a while and then we have to go put another meter on, then we would charge them for that meter then. So new developers, new customers are paying for that meter.
The reason I was asking is it seems like we would want to encourage them, even if they're late, to put in that meter. So I was just wondering if
This is
a good idea.
If they're late.
This isn't late, this is a change. Once they've opted out, and then they come back in, so there's not a late situation here. This is a choice that I think people are making.
If they're late, according to policy, we will, if they don't pay their bill and they get a disconnect notice, then we'd automatically go put one on.
Travis, I think the question is coming because it's the last one down there, it says late AMI installation. But I think you explained that that's not what it really means. It means if somebody converts, if you have to switch somebody back to a mechanical and then they want to go back to an AMI meter, that's what it means.
And it's after this deployment period, and we figure we'll have all the meters deployed by September. So I think that won't be an issue.
You're talking to 2 or 3 people right now.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that after we discuss that they will get on board. Okay.
I think what Dave was saying, I have kind of the same feeling. It's not a late fee, but if someone opts out for whatever the reasons, and I've heard from 3 or 4 people for their reasons, the safety and the privacy thing, those are the 2 big arguments. So they've opted out, and maybe down the road they decide, no, let's get on board. I'm wondering, so why are we punishing them? That's what we want them to do because of all these benefits over here. So if there's 25 and maybe only 3 when we get down to it, I mean, that $230 times 3, I don't think that's gonna make a huge impact on the electrical budget. I just,
the only reason we put it there,
I'm almost feeling that way with the $25 a month thing. I mean, if there's 3 people, it almost seems like we're being a little bit punitive, like, if you don't opt in, no, if you don't do it, because you don't get a chance whether you do it or not, you have to opt out, there's going to be some punishment, and that punishment's going to, and I don't know, I'm struggling with that sort of.
I understand. It does require more work for us. It requires more work for the billing system, the billing people. It'll be outside of what we normally do. And so it'll be a little bit more cost to cover those. So we were just trying to, this is what the cost would be if we had to send someone out to read it on a monthly basis.
Travis, isn't true. If you don't have that fee, I think you might have more people opting out also.
That's probably the.
I would think that's
That's probably there's a term for that. Let me see there. It's called negative option marketing. So I'm going to be a book club you sign up. If you're signing up for the book club, it's going to come every month. We're going to charge you until you let us know it's opt out. It's kind of the same philosophy. And I just don't quite. I mean, we're talking about 3 people. I mean, is that worth the PR? Most of the people, not almost, the people that I talk to that who want to opt out and they feel they're being punished. They're very, we might call, I don't know how you want to label them, but they're very privacy and they're very, they're extreme on the health thing. And all the reports we show them aren't gonna, I don't think, convince them differently. I mean, that's just, they're kind of anti-big government, for sure. If we get all this information, they're gonna be telling us when you can run your air conditioner and when you can turn your heat on. But rather than say, okay, you can think that way, but because you're thinking that way, we're gonna charge you this. I think if there's 3 or 10 or 20 of them, I don't know that it's worth adding to that contention that's already, just my thought.
Well, I wanted to give them an option so they would have somewhere if they really are serious about that. But I also believe that they should cover the cost to keep that going, because it obviously will be something that will be outside the norm. And so it's really just this is what we have to do to cover that cost.
I think though it's fair to say, Travis, you're most concerned about the $25 fee,
Sure.
not so much what the council felt. Agreeing with that, I don't think you'd do that.
No, not at all. Yeah, that would be, take the $135 off, just be a $95.
That's already on the schedule, that would be a removal. You're asking for approval of that today.
Right. I am just asking for the $25 per month. Dave?
So on that late fee, let's say somebody opts out and they finally die or move, and then the new person shows up and says, I want the convenience of an AMI. I want to know how my power's being billed. And well, if you want that, pay to have it installed, because we're gonna have to come out special for you.
And normally we would do that anyway, because a new customer will get the new meter, and that would be part of the fee of doing a new connect. And the cost of the meter is already in the connection fee.
I'm just saying on a house that had opted out. Yes. And they changed.
And maybe a family member.
And the house finally sells. And the new owner goes, I want the new meters.
Yeah, that would be part of their connection fee. They'd get one anyway. They would get a new meter.
Oh.
Because they're gonna get a new connection,
Just because they sold the house.
Yeah.
The name on the
new name on the account.
changed.
They would have to put another deposit on the account. All that's rolled up into those fees.
And you still have to go out to the location.
Need a motion?
I think we're looking for a motion to put this on the agenda, aren't we?
I have one question.
Yes.
On the map, you showed us all of the bright purple dots, which I thought you said represented 21 people in that area. Or
It's in the whole
21
city.
Total.
21 total.
Okay, so why was there a big one over Rock Canyon?
I think because when I put it in there, I clicked on the customer and then I just the window hadn't closed. So
Okay,
it was just,
that was 21 times 5, it was just 21. And a little miss on the.
that was particularly bad. No. Had nothing to do with it.
That's a park mostly. I'm not sure how many people opposed.
No, that was just one person.
Okay, one person, okay.
Make a motion that we move it to the agenda on our next council meeting tonight or the next one?
Next one.
In 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Council meeting on the 21st.
Have a motion from Mr. Stewart, is there a second? Second, by Mr. Woodson. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, item number 2 is the discussion on the form-based code in our recent retreat. I think a few council members have expressed interest in hearing from someone that had actual experience with this. And so community development has invited Jake Young to
Just by way of introduction, Jake spoke at the League of Cities and Towns Convention last fall. We had the opportunity to hear him there, and that's where he made his acquaintance. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, I'll go ahead and introduce myself while this is loading. I'm Jake Young. I live in Farmington, Utah, born and raised in Utah. And my dad actually worked at BYU for 20 years. So I've made many trips here. He was in the College of Education, and my parents live in Mapleton. So I come down this way quite often. And I just want to thank the mayor and the city council for letting me come and talk about form-based codes. I'm really passionate about city design and planning. And I want to ask you real quick, what's a place that you've been recently that's really been on your mind? And this is just an open dialogue, just to shout out a name, a place that you've been, and because of the form of the community, it's been on your mind.
It's been a while, but one that stands out to me is Daybreak.
Daybreak's incredible, and Daybreak does have their own form-based codes that they use, kind of in-house. What else?
East Mesa.
East Mesa? Great, thank you. I don't know that, but I have heard good things about Mesa. In January, I was at a leadership conference in Savannah, Georgia. I didn't know a lot about Savannah before going, and was kind of excited. And I was blown away how beautiful that city is. It is absolutely a beautiful city. I walk probably 10 to 15 miles a day just seeing the city. And they have neighborhoods upon neighborhoods of beautiful streets and sidewalks and trees and buildings. And it's like Provo Center Street, and then it keeps going out and out. You think, how can a city like this have so much amazing? And it all comes down to the original planning and how they've upkept that design over the years. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. We have a lot of big issues to tackle as city planners and designers, and especially you as city leaders. And all of these issues can be improved by form-based codes. I'm not going to say a form-based code will solve it, but they can be improved. Population growth, as you know, Utah County led the way in 2015 and 2016, beating out Salt Lake. Health and obesity is a big issue across the nation. That can also be improved with form-based codes, making a community walkable. Affordable housing, cleaner air. I did review your Provo Clean Air Toolkit. I think it's amazing. And I wanted to actually online just insert form-based codes when I saw that, said, hey, let's just add this right here to the toolkit. And then, of course, agriculture and open space, and that battle between what's going on in the county and what's going on in the city in terms of growth and development.
Either March 4th.
Think about tools, right? How tools changed over the years. You know, this is just kind of a graphic I pulled from the internet, kind of old tools and how we're improving them. And I looked at it and said, okay, you know, we think about ancient cities, Rome and Greece, and how they do their planning, and then our colonial cities, Williamsburg and back east, and then we think about our pioneers in Utah and the grid and the Plat of Zion, and a lot of amazing things happen there. I added the Garden City movement, what was going on in the 1920s.
Probably just
beautiful cities and trying to get away from the pollution of the city. And then also when we hit the sprawl, that's where like power tools came in. You know, everything was designed around the car. And then now we're looking at the future.
This is from the
mixed use and form-based codes are a potential tool. And that's just what I want to say is form-based code. Form-based code is a planning tool. That's what it is. It's a planning tool, and it's something to consider.
Okay.
The theory about form-based codes is very different. So conventional zoning, the big thing is regulatory use. That's policy, text, operations, and then form. And there's always, form has always been part of, you know, planning codes and ordinances. But the big difference on form-based codes is, of course, the form, the streetscape, building to building. What's going on with the neighborhood? What's going on with the block? How big is the block?
Not that I'm aware of.
The block? And then use is still part of it, and operations there. So that's the big philosophical difference between form-based codes and kind of the regulatory Euclidean codes that we've been using. Some of the issues with traditional zoning is basically kind of this spot zoning, works here, and then you start copying codes, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, what are we doing? Are we transitioning from the core of the city to the foothills or out west? Traditional zoning is more reactive than proactive. Mixing uses is always hard. with traditional zoning, dealing with density. In a lot of cities in Utah, density should be a 4-letter word, but form-based codes can handle density a little bit different. Dealing with design. Design is a big part of form-based codes. And then form-based codes are more about planning or designing what you want to see, the built environment. Okay, part of this is what kind of places do you want to have? Center Street is absolutely amazing. It's a lot like this picture here in the right-hand corner. And the rest of these pictures could be anywhere in Utah or anywhere in the US. And that's kind of what our ordinances have been doing. How many times have you seen a picture and you look at it and you think, well, that could be Utah, or that could be Dallas, or that could be California? And that's because our conventional zoning really kind of promotes very typical planning. So in terms of form-based coding, a lot of it is about planning great places that are good for people, having vision. It's about great streets. And I really love Center Street here. I use it all the time. I've talked about it with communities in Cache Valley, with communities in Salt Lake, with Vineyard. Provo Center Street is a great place. And so how do we maybe look at expanding that, having other great places? See, these are some of the parts of form-based codes. The public realm, that's the right-of-way, but also thinking about building to building as well. Again, buildings, thinking about buildings with form-based codes. How many great buildings have you had in Provo on University Avenue, your other great streets that have been there decades upon decades, and how many businesses have come and gone in those buildings? And part of the theory of form-based codes is let's get great buildings and then let businesses come and go, and hopefully they stay and prosper, but sometimes they do go for whatever reason. But it's about having those buildings that are landmarks that last a long time. Open space, parks, important part of form-based codes, landscaping, parking, signs, and then uses as well. Okay, this is called the transect, and basically it's like going up a canyon. One of my favorite canyons to bike is Hobble Creek. As you start going up the canyon, the vegetation starts to change. You see, the aspen's about 7,000 feet, and that's kind of like a transect. So you think about over on the right side, you see the buildings, that's downtown Provo. And then as you go west or as you go east to the mountains, you start to go down in terms of density and height. And this is something that already happens, but form-based codes are set up to do these transects where you go from the higher use up and you transition. And so you don't end up with buildings in the wrong place. Really kind of transition one step at a time. Okay, what are the main parts of a form-based code? You have the buildings, you have the streetscape, neighborhoods. Some of the form-based codes that we've been doing, we're maximizing, minimizing how big a block can be. No bigger than kind of the Utah standard block, which is 600 by 600, or even trying to take that down to 400 by 400. But form-based codes have all of those parts in it. Okay, so we did a survey and we wanted to understand how are form-based codes being used in Utah? Are they improving? And also we included design standards. And design standards and form-based codes are somewhat close. You're basically saying this is the city code and it's all about the design. And so all these cities responded, including Provo. So I appreciate that. And just a few basic questions. Is the form-based code meeting the intent of the ordinance and the zone? And you'll see here in blue, highly satisfied at 33%, somewhat satisfied at 43%, and then lesser on the other. So in general, these cities are saying, okay, they're working. The next question was, are we getting higher quality buildings? That's one of the main purposes of a form-based code. If we're going to do this, are we getting better buildings? And it came in at 41% highly satisfied, 25% somewhat satisfied, and then 17% less satisfied. And then there's that 17 they weren't quite sure. Quality sites. What's the parking lot like? What's the landscaping, the sidewalks, all of that. Again, somewhat comparable, 25% highly satisfied, 33% somewhat satisfied, 25% not sure, and then 17% less satisfied. So I think cities are seeing improvements on that. And this one was about comparing proposed projects, so anything that's at the city, whether it's built or not built, compared with built and also proposed, the drawings are in, and how's it comparing. So you'll see over here we got 15% resulting in similar quality, 8% unsure, 8% resulting in lesser quality, and then 54% resulting in higher quality. Okay, this was the big surprise of the survey. The big surprise was easier to administer, and this is where we're looking at form-based code. Okay, how can we improve them? What do cities need to administer them? And the biggest thing was 55% said that they were less satisfied in terms of administration. And we asked some of the city planners and cities what was their take on that. And part of it is a learning curve for developers. So they open up the city website, they go to the code, and whoa, this is different. You're asking me to dive into the actual design instead of me just reading the text and apply it how I want. Also new for city planners and administrators in terms of how to approve drawings, how to approve plans, and then also just kind of in general, it's a newer take on it. So I think there is ground here to improve on. Some of the myths of form-based codes, one is that it's new. Even looking at historic pioneering documents in Utah, you'll see that our founders had some of these same ideas in terms of buildings and streets that are all about form. That you can't be creative. Sometimes an architect may think that the city's trying to design the building, and there is a balance there. What do you ask for, and what are you willing to give the architect to work with? And it's that way with conventional zoning as well. Form-based codes usually never involve uses. That's not true. Every form-based code that I've worked on or seen has a use table. It's there. And just less text. And then the Utah template. And so what APA did, American Planning Association, also WFRC did, is they took and they created a tool to make form-based codes. So basically, it's a template that you take and you modify it for your city. And then the last one, you have to form-based code the whole community. I've not seen any cities do this across the entire community. Most cities are starting out in their core, their downtown, and then start working out a little bit on their form-based code. Nobody in Utah has it for their entire city. Some of the challenges, the process of creating the form-based code, more intensive review for staff. They're looking at the design and more on the design. Training for elected officials. Basically, you as a city council have to adopt the new ordinance if you did one, and so there would be training there. Getting the community to support the form-based code, do something different. And then this last one, I say failure to trust the design. I've seen some cities say, we like what the form-based code is supposed to do, but we're not willing to raise density and design at the same time. They're not willing to trust the design in the form-based code. Please.
Says getting your community to accept more permitted uses. Can you give examples?
So a conventional code ordinance, basically you would have a very long list of approved uses, just a lot of text. Where in a form-based code, what some cities do is consolidate that into less uses because the design is going to control it. For example, drive-throughs. There's lots of different type of drive-throughs. Well, if you want to require the building to be pushed up closer to the street and the drive-through is on the side or the behind of the building, then it doesn't matter as much what is that use in the building, as long as spatially it's working and it's safe.
This is, it says accepting more permitted uses rather than less.
Oh. Good point. Typically, form-based codes do have less uses. Some of the other challenges, comprehensive placemaking, basically really looking at the places and how can you make them really nice, adding flexibility to your standards. And the last one, typically form-based codes are done in Adobe InDesign, which is different than like a Sterling Codifier or something like that. Because there's so many graphics, it is a little bit of a, at this point, a digital challenge in terms of how is it put online. Typically cities just put a PDF online and that can be searched, but it's not using that same tool that some cities are using, like a codifier. I want to share a couple of case studies of form-based codes, of how they are working. This one's in Logan, and so up here on the north, you have a typical kind of suburban development, and then on the south here, you have a newer project that was built under Logan City's form-based code, and they call their code placemaking, but it's very comparable. This is the standard. This is what Logan did 15, 20 years ago. You know, a big box behind, lots of parking lots on the street. You know, pretty typical. It could be anywhere. USA, same site, just a different picture. And then this is the new project that happened about 3 or 4 years ago under the form-based code. More buildings on the street, also the requirement of a sidewalk from the building out to the street, so adding some connectivity on site, more glass on the buildings. These buildings do face the street even though they have the entry behind, and they also have doors on the buildings so that in the future, if these buildings, people want to come from the street, then you have that option. Another example, another picture of that. Here's a close-up. So some of the requirements of their code, overhangs on all the entries into the building. On the building, there's building articulation, basically breaking up the roof line of the buildings. And then also wider sidewalks. And in this case, I think there should be more sidewalk there, but they went with grass and sidewalk. And then signage, also low profile sign, grouping of sign, not the big highway sign. So that's kind of a visual comparison of 15-year-old project under old ordinance and then new project. This next one is also from Logan, and this is one of the ones I like the best because it's a gas station. And you know, who would ever say that a gas station is a beautiful building? And I still haven't seen a beautiful gas station, but this is one of the better gas stations that I've seen, and it enhances the looks of the community, but it's also safer for kids or parents walking in the gas station. Here's the new one right here. It's a Maverick right on the corner, and then across the street, you know, is your typical gas station. Don't need to spend any time on what does a typical gas station look like. Every city has them. But I do want to jump in on the new gas station, and this was required because of Logan City's code. There was some back and forth with Maverick, some back and forth with the city, and there are things in the code that made this happen. So you'll notice the buildings on the corner, they've got some architecture on the corner, so when you're driving you see that. The tower coming up, four-sided architecture. On all four sides there's glass, different materials. And then also you'll notice pedestrian connection from the sidewalks to get inside the store. And then low profile sign. And to me, if you can take a gas station and make it better, then you're showing that you're improving your planning and your ordinances, because gas stations are what they are, but there's no reason why we can't make them better. South Salt Lake has a lot of not very desirable apartments, I'll just say that, but many cities do. South Salt Lake passed a form-based code, and then within a few weeks, this project came online right next to their transit, and they saw a direct result of the developer was already working on this project, but the process and the involvement of the developer during the form-based code, and then when the form-based code was passed, it really moved the project along quickly. So they saw that collaboration between the city and the developer to really make something nice happen. And this project's under construction right now. South Salt Lake, if you've been on 4 South in Salt Lake recently, you've seen a lot of buildings. Salt Lake has a code that is somewhat form-based, and they give points to projects that are more form-based code and that are meeting the requirements. And so it moves you along faster, so you get approval faster, and you can also increase density and certain things like that. Here are some typical pictures of 4 South right now. And then I'm going to show you some of the newer projects. You'll notice the 7-Eleven up here in the corner, a bank, apartment, a restaurant. And then here's some of the newer projects that have been built under their code. You'll see the 7-Eleven. It's up near 9th East. Newer apartments, office building, and more apartments. All this is these are results of their form-based code. Some practices on form-based codes. Field trips are really important. Getting out with a steering committee, walking, looking at projects, looking at different parts of your city, looking at different parts of good development in Salt Lake, in Utah County, other places. We worked on a form-based code for Vineyard, and we took a trip up to Portland and went to Aranco Station, and there were a number of good ideas that Vineyard liked for Aranco Station, which is a suburb of Portland and a TOD, and so we used some of those ideas. Visioning, that's very important. You need to have your vision, which I know Provo does. Understanding of place, what do you want the place to be like? Invite the community, having workshops where residents can sit down with a Sharpie and show you what they want to see. That's very helpful. Education is also helpful. And then I like this part, eliminate the word density. And again, that's trusting the design. And in some form-based codes, they actually remove density, but you don't have to do that. It's not a requirement. Basically, it's like if all the components of a form-based code are already controlling the density, the height, the setback, required open space. And so the density is being controlled in many other factors. Yes, please, David.
One thing that controls density, at least here, is parking ratios. What do you say about parking ratios?
Well, of course, you're going to still have parking with form-based codes. One thing that we've done on some of the form-based codes we've worked on is really encourage shared parking. So if a developer comes in and he has 2 uses, for example, office, and then also has a restaurant, and the use is different. The office is busy during the day, and then the restaurant is busy at night. Then through a study, you can show that we're lowering parking by 20%. We can basically allow that to drop down.
Second question, what would be the difference between design corridors, which we have in Provo, and form-based coding?
A design corridor, can you tell me a little bit more about your perception of your design corridors? Because I don't.
Well, I think on the one hand, we can do a design corridor that just dictates the street frontage, and then, but we can also talk about how close the buildings are, and typically when we do a complete design corridor, we do talk about the placement of buildings and setbacks to the public, sidewalk, etc., because you want it to be aesthetically pleasing, like our North University corridor?
Some form-based codes are basically a design corridor that they're all about the street. The requirements, the building heights, the setbacks, the design requirements are based on that street, that corridor. And instead of it being a zone, you know, those 10 acres, they are about the street. And other ones are about a zone. So a form-based code really, it can be street oriented. And that's my presentation. Ideas, discussion, what do you think?
Question. My initial reaction is, I think this is the first time I felt like I had a little bit of a handle on what form-based code is and what its potential is. So I appreciate the way you described it. That was a very good overview.
Thank you.
I remember discussions years ago where developers accused Provo City of trying to micromanage how they were doing a project by complaining about its form or its color or its layout, floor designs, all that. And they were like, just let us build, get out of the way and let us build something that the market wants, that we know the market. So do you have a reaction to how do builders perceive this?
Well, there's the same issue, and just like with any ordinance, there's that scale of how detailed do you want to go? Materials, colors, all of that, or how maybe big picture, just looking at the form of the buildings, the form of the streetscape. So there is that question of how far does the city want to go? How we've dealt with some of these issues, significant involvement by developers during the form-based code process. So they're at the table with the planners, the city council, planning commission, the developers there during kind of a workshops in that process. They also get to see drafts of the code and work on that during the process of preparing the code. Those are things that we've found have created a positive atmosphere when it comes to adoption. Also willing to do trade-offs, maybe give a little bit more density, but then also requiring higher design in terms of what are you giving, but then also what is the city receiving.
Where does just judgment come in as far as you get this and you get this? Is it community development that makes those decisions, or does it appears sometimes that it can be very arbitrary?
There probably is some of that, but the idea of the form-based code is to be a little bit more proactive of what you want to see. And even in the code, you're showing it with graphics and diagrams and pictures. And so the developer is seeing a little bit more of the vision of the city through the design of the code. And I think there's always that balance of wanting to put more in to ask for more, but then the other side saying, how can we simplify this and get exactly what the city needs and then give the developer the flexibility they want. But the form-based code is about being proactive on the design. It's more of a design code than policy-based.
So, look at the form of some buildings. On University Avenue, about first north on the northwest corner, a law firm went in there, or a title company, and put in something that really looked fitting. And then we had Central Bank on the other corner that remodeled and did it to look like the downtown form, the older. To me, there are some forms that are classic or timeless, and others that seem to be more faddish. And so when we lay out what form we want, that's going to be just a snapshot of how we feel the form should be at this moment in time. But over time, that may not be a form that really holds its value or the people who go back and they go, oh yeah, that was so yesterday. So there's I suppose there's an opportunity, but there's also a pitfall if you choose the wrong form.
There's one city center.
I would agree with that. That's a great point. I mean, nobody wants it to look like, 1970s architecture. Well, some 1970s architecture or all, tan stucco from the 90s. Other parts of the form-based code really are timeless. The idea of a grid or, blocks really, working on that element, bringing buildings up closer to the street, putting parking behind, wider sidewalks, landscaping. There's plenty of elements I think that are very timeless that I've personally looked back hundreds of years and said these old cities or these old codes have done this and we like that. And there are other elements that say, yeah, we may be doing something a little bit different.
I would guess that while form-based code, you could use it to start to dictate style. My understanding is that's not necessary. You can dictate elements of the form, but not necessarily say it needs to be this style, and so you can have form-based codes without saying that it has to be tan stucco. It can be broad, and let the styles let the builders decide what styles to put in, as long as it street setbacks and
Well,
things like that.
correct, and we saw that on 9th East and 7th North. At least that's not my favorite building.
I've heard mixed feelings on that. People are usually pretty passionate about that building. That's true.
On the study that you did you get any commentary on people that didn't love it? So there's more than half, it seemed on most of your graphs that felt like it was a good thing or they liked what they were seeing. So those that didn't love it, didn't like it necessarily, did you get commentary on why they felt like it wasn't what they hoped it would be? And did you see any unintended consequences of focusing on the form and then you get uses that you didn't particularly want? Or I know you mentioned that uses could be part of that, but do you have any?
Some, yeah, definitely. They're at this point, it looks like it's a minority group in terms of city planners that don't like it. A lot of it is they don't like having to go through the education process with the developer and their steering committee and even the city, because we're taking these tools that have been used for 50 years that are pretty much the same and we're doing it differently. So I think it's the headache of doing something new that city staff isn't necessarily loving.
Of all of your respondents, what percentage were planners that responded and what percentage were elected officials?
Well, I don't have that exact number, but it did go out through APA, American Planning Association. So yeah, I would bet it's mostly planners, and it would be great to do actually a study to see what councils say and elected officials.
And what's the reaction of the public?
The public, that's a good question too. So the first form-based code I worked on was in Cache Valley, and in the beginning it was very hard. We had a steering committee with planning commission, just like most cities, just residents that care about their city, that want to improve. And once they got this idea that the code was about the design and the form, that vision actually, that group embraced it. And I've seen other groups, and on every project we've done, we've always done a steering committee with a variety of individuals on it. And it takes a number of meetings and discussion, and for them to kind of go through that personal look at it. And almost all of them have supported it. I actually can't think of very many residents or citizens that have participated at a good level and opposed it. Once people spend the time just looking at it, they get it, because you see the code, in terms of the graphics and the design intent of it. But public, in terms of adoption, we haven't had any major issues in terms of, big crowds showing up. Sometimes, density is an issue, but I think that's going to be an issue no matter what the code is.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't really necessarily have a next step at this point. I guess we'll need to gauge your interest in some fashions. If you want to explore this more, any comments or thoughts on that?
This is extract. I'm just curious, community development, I'd like to hear them, how they are seeing this fitting into our specific community and what they see this,
how we could implement it.
So, we'll go ahead, Mr. Harding.
I was looking for that Utah form-based code template. Didn't find it, but I did find the South Salt Lake East Streetcar neighborhood form-based code, and it's been just kind of flipping through it. It's kind of been helpful to kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. I do think that it is something that we should consider for our ITOD as a tool for what we're trying to achieve there. I think that's an area that we've got a pretty we'd like to see there, and some questions on whether our current actions are achieving the vision that the goals that we're trying to achieve. So I personally would be interested in exploring more on if form-based codes are a good tool for that area.
Mr. Heath?
And just building off what Dave was talking about, we do have the TOD zone, which to me kind of does dictate a lot of the form by how close you are to the street and the density, and that's really what to me dictated the form of both Startup Crossing, Central Park Station, and some of the other projects we're seeing downtown. We are, of course, reevaluating parking. Just today, I was up in Orem, and we have Orem Boulevard just to the west of State Street, and at Center Street and Orem Boulevard, just up a little bit, is a new project called Boulevard. And I went through and counted the units on the parking spaces, and they had like a 1.5 ratio. Their parking, which I thought was interesting. We also have our design corridors. I remember on West Center Street, 9th West, where the Reams was, there was a big debate about how Maverick should look, and we actually had kind of a form-based code in place that would have a building out front, and that kind of changed to what it is now, more of what we have done in the past. But to me, there's I drive there and I look at it and I go, it's a very nice look. And if the building had been right up to the intersection, for me, it becomes almost claustrophobic. I like the fact that the building is out there and that the intersection is more open for not just seeing the traffic, but if I'm in a city and I feel just like everything is closing in on me, it's nice to have some variety or open space. So I didn't mind the fact that the Maverick was actually changed to be on the back of the property.
Mr. Stewart. My understanding is that once you adopt a form-based code, it takes the review of the development out of the hands of the elected officials, the council, more so than our current system. Is that the case?
I think you could do whatever you want in that case. The idea is to ease it up a little bit, easier for developers and easier for staff in terms of it is more proactive. However, some cities still, the city council still remains the same approval process that they had before. But you're right, the intent is that your ideas are in the code and that it is an easier, faster process for the developer. However, it doesn't have to be that way.
Councils change, so one council could have a form-based code that they feel comfortable with, but a new council come in would either have to change it back to where it was before, or do we do the form-based, or what would they do?
They would have to change it. Just like I imagine now, if you don't like your ordinance, then your current council would say, let's change that. So in that case, it's comparable. However, if it would be a disaster for a city to adopt a form-based code, have it in place for 5 years, and then say, oh, we don't want that, let's go back to what we were 5 years ago. That would be a disaster. What a lot of cities are doing is adopting a form-based code in a certain areas. Their TOD, a city center, a mixed-use neighborhood, and then test it out for a number of years, see the projects that are built, see what the developers are saying, and do it maybe, one section at a time.
We tried that with reduced parking ratios. We're looking to make some changes today.
So, does this encourage, is it preferable to pre-zone when you do this?
Explain what you mean by
pre-zoning?
Yeah, what's in your?
Well, I mean, we did that with our transportation money in the district where we created it and we just said, this is where it is, come in and build, and then when someone applies, if it meets all the requirements, it's just approved because it was pre-zoned. Whereas there's places in Provo that they're not in the general plan they call out what should be there, but the zone is not currently compatible with the general plan. So they have to ask for a zone change and they have to show us the project and then we get to approve it largely based on whether we think the project is going to give us what we want.
So I would say it is more like the pre-zoning philosophy, and developers like it because it moves the process faster. However, again, the control is up to whatever the city wants to do. But that is kind of the idea is get more of what you want in terms of the form and the design in the code. And so it speeds up that process. But you could still, of course, all drawings should be reviewed before a project is built.
So one of the arguments I've heard in the discussion about pre-zoning or not and all of that, and I'm going to kind of repeat that argument or articulate that argument. It's not necessarily that I fully endorse it, but the argument has been, or there is an argument that the reason why we don't pre-zone, that we create a vision, like, okay, here's our general plan, or here's our vision that we expect this to be something, but we're not actually going to grant the zoning, is because the council doesn't feel that the zoning is sufficient to bring about what we want. And so we don't, in a way, in a nutshell, we don't trust that if we pre-zoned it, that we would get the stuff that we actually want. So it's too broad, and we might get something we don't want. Therefore, we're going to maintain control. We're going to say this is what we want, but we're not actually going to grant people the rights to develop under our zoning until they present us something that we like. The thought behind the form-based code is if you create it well enough, then you can trust it that you can pre-zone and it will achieve the outcomes that you're looking for. And so you don't need to have that level of oversight or control because it's written well enough that you can trust it. And you can just put it into place and it can streamline the developers. You communicate enough upfront that the developers can say, hey, that's something I want to build to, or no, I'm going to go look somewhere else, rather than getting in and then having to get a decision from the council if yes, you can move forward or no, you can't.
Certainly it adds some predictability for a developer.
but it takes away the discretion of public, neighborhoods, and the council.
You can say it takes it away, or it shifts it. It shifts it from per project approval or per project control, and you shift those preferences back to when the code is written, the form-based code is written, so that, and if it's done well, then you haven't lost the control, it's just moved earlier in the process.
Before someone's actually made application.
Right. But if it, and again, you could be very, very controlling and say this is exactly what we want, and maybe no one will ever take you up on it. Or you can be very loose about it, but those decisions are just moved early on when the code is created rather than as projects are proposed.
And one final thought, for example, up on 3700 North University, very difficult piece of property, gone on for forever, and for the city to say this is what we definitely want there. I don't know. It took a long time for anyone to figure out what could even go there.
It's not just city, but it'd be the residents and everything.
Yeah, developer, resident, city, it was round and around and around forever. And if anyone could have figured it out 20 years ago and said, hey, this is the ideal thing, that would have been great, but we never could.
So we're running way behind schedule here. I just have a thought to throw out. I know we have a reluctance to consider pre-zoning in any kind of broad sense, but the ITOT, I guess we've already pre-zoned essentially, so it might be a way to apply some of these principles there, as Mr. Harding suggested. Is there enough interest in this to ask community development to come back and give us a short presentation on, if you wanted to take another step, this is what we would recommend? Is there?
There is.
Not for me.
I'd like to see a proposal from them next step.
Okay, so how many, I think I'd be interested at least going that far, so we've got 3. Are there any others?
Question.
Yes.
I would be interested in hearing how they think it could help our current process without radically changing our process. If we can have better form to stay within the process that we are currently using and have, I mean, we have design corridors. Do we need to review those? I mean, we have been doing and considering form and function all along the way. And if we can make tweaks and modifications to our general zoning policies, that would be of interest. If they want to do something different, and they frankly are doing something different in the transportation-oriented district, because we're looking at the minimum size for apartments, we're looking at the parking. So I'm always willing to listen, but I'm not willing to necessarily want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If just changing the water is what we need to do.
Right.
If things kind of, I'd be interested in listening, I just don't want to move a lot of water, thinking that I'm going to go form-based zoning. If my current feeling is I probably would not go for form-based zoning. And so, I think maybe that's a better question.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that hardly any of us want to make a major, massive shift in the way we do things, but I guess I'm just wondering if there's anyone else that
That's what they said. We want to support that.
Do we need a motion for that? To just go ahead and ask community development to come back?
So, and Gary's not here. I'm hoping maybe tomorrow in leadership, you can kind of firm up exactly what the request is and communicate with Gary so that he knows exactly how to respond to that. I'm sure we'd be happy to do it. I just want to make sure that he's clear about what you're asking.
Okay, well, let's give that our best shot. It may take some time to clarify that, exactly what we're asking, so I'm not 100% sure, but I think I could say safely that we're talking about a small step here, right? At least just getting some more information, basically. So
I'd like to see how they think they could implement something like this and what effect it would have. I don't want them to go to a lot of effort, because we don't know what I'm getting now, so.
They probably have some ideas anyway, so. All right, we'll work that out with leadership and ask them to come back with a short presentation, if that's all right. All right, thank you. All right, let's move on to item number 3, presentation on the water division. This was part of a review requested by the council. Mr. Decker, is he going to present? Great. And I know,
Yes, I can see we're ready
to go here, and I know you've got a lot of tremendous good stuff for us here, but please also keep in mind that I'm here, so just make up a few minutes.
If you need to cut me off, just let me know. I'm happy to.
I need you guys to get some water.
What's that?
All right, well, how about if we just ask you to stick with the target?
We'll go as fast as we can here. Thank you for the opportunity to visit today, and just kind of ignore a couple of things that are going on here. We'll get started and we'll explain what we're doing here in just a couple of minutes. I first want to acknowledge staff that is here present with me today. I want to introduce and make sure you've probably met a number of them, but a few of them you probably haven't. Gary Calder's right here on my right. He's the Division Director for Water and Wastewater. You've also probably met and seen Jimmy McKnight. He's in the back. He's the Finance Analyst for Public Works. We also have 2 senior engineers with us, Rebecca Andrus and Shane Jones. You may have seen them in presentations before. I also want to make sure that you're introduced to 2 key people that are sitting in the back. Ryan York, who was just setting up our buckets for a little demonstration here. Ryan York is our sources manager, and sitting next to him is Matt Hutchings. You may not have met either one of these people in the past, but in my opinion, they're some of the key people in water. Ryan is over all of our sources, and Matt is over our distribution system. We have about 30 plus key employees in water, and hopefully the presentation today and in the coming weeks will help you get an idea of the task that is given to them every single day to provide water to the residents of Provo, and they do just a fantastic job. So I wanted to make sure that you met a couple of key people that make it happen in the field every single day. And I promise that I won't turn to them very often, but they may get asked to do a little bit here. I also wanted to let the council know, and Mayor, if you don't mind passing those around, while the mayor's handing those out, about a week and a half ago, I sent an email to the mayor, as I indicated 2 weeks ago. I tried to consolidate the questions and the topics that I was hearing the council talk about, and I consolidated them down into 7 topics. I sent the mayor a copy of those 7 topics, and today we're giving the first topic. It's an overview of the executive summary of the master plan, the water master plan that was completed in 2013. We have 6 other topics. They range from about 30 to 60 minutes, and they are very much in the weeds on water topics. They're very detailed. You're going to get a lot of information. The topic today is a very broad, high-level, 30,000-foot review of the water system and the master plan. I like the fact we've spent quite a bit of time with the councils, especially in the past, relative to financial parts of the master plan, and part of the reason that I chose to do the executive summary from the water master plan is the first presentation. It's a nice outsider look at the water system. It's not staff's perspective or somebody's perspective that has a lot to do with it on a consistent basis. It's an outsider that gets to look at our system. And so I think they are a little bit more at liberty to tell us exactly where they feel like we're at relative to other water systems. Cliff, if you'll make sure, we got plenty of copies. If there's other people, there's finance committee members and some other people that may need a copy of that fact sheet. Really quickly, I want to go through some things on the fact sheet that was just handed out in 2016. These numbers are based in information in 2016. We had 9 billion gallons, just over 9 billion gallons of water that was produced in 2016. I want to try to help you equate that to a couple of things. Well, I'll come back in just a second here. Our peak day is about 50 million gallons. It's usually around July 24th. Our average day is about half of that, 25 million gallons. And the lowest that we ever produce in a day is usually down around 10 to 13 million gallons. That's the lowest that we ever produce. And last year in February of 16, that's what we produced. I want to help you understand what those numbers mean and get a little perspective. The first one I want to talk about is the 9 billion gallons. And you might want to write this down because some of the graphs in the master plan refer to billions of gallons in acre feet. That's a common term, and you'll see down at the bottom of the fact sheet, we in water industry, we talk about gallons and acre feet as though it's the same language, and I recognize it's hard for people that are not necessarily in the industry to kind of understand what does an acre foot of water look like. And I mean, it's literally what it sounds like. It's an acre of ground with 1 foot of water sitting on top of it. It's about 325,000 gallons of water, and that's one of the conversions. So 9 billion gallons of water, that's about 27,500 acre feet, 27,500 acre feet of water. And you'll see that number. I also had Gary, I wanted to give a little bit of perspective again on that. So Gary said, well, if we put that in an acre of ground and you can picture something 27,000 feet tall, so Mount Everest is not, it's a little bit higher than 27,000 feet, but it's about the height of Mount Everest. That's how much water Provo uses annually. That's a lot of water. Also on our maximum day, 50 million gallons, I asked Ryan to bring 5-gallon buckets. And by the way, I think some of the more senior council members know I sometimes do some odd presentations to try to help people get a little perspective. We're not going to ask anybody to do anything today, so you don't have to worry about it today. But I am reserving the right in the future to do something a little unusual. But
you will respect age.
No respect.
Well, it's mostly more willingness to participate. So we try not to get people wet or anything like that in the presentations. But I wanted to give you a little perspective. 50 million gallons a day. That's about 35,000 gallons a minute that we have to produce to meet that. That's an average production during that day. It's about 120 5-gallon buckets of water per second that we have to produce. Ryan's got 10 5-gallon buckets, so there's 6 times that many gallons, or 6 times that many buckets, if you can picture that, and we have to produce that amount of water every second. I need to make sure on the 50 million, it's 120. So you got to 12 times the number of buckets that you see here. It's 120 buckets. On an average day, it's about 60 buckets, 65-gallon buckets. So it gives you a little bit of perspective every second that we're producing. Also down the rest of the fact sheet in our sources, and again, make sure that you keep this in perspective about the production that I just talked about. Our springs in Provo Canyon produce somewhere between 7,000 to 12,000 gallons a minute. Depends on whether it's a dry year or a wet year. It varies, and you'll see some of that information. Our wells can produce just a little under 32,000 gallons a minute. It's about 31,700, I think. And that's assuming that every single well is operating perfectly and nothing's broken down and anything like that. Right now on storage, we have 32 million gallons. There's 2 tanks that are under construction. We'll talk a little bit about those today. 2 tanks that will add 10 million gallons. So hopefully by midsummer, fall of this year, we'll have 42 million gallons of storage. Provo City has about 2 million feet of water lines, and I've broken it down there in a couple of categories. 4 to 8 inch lines obviously make up the majority of the system. A little bit bigger lines are broken down. We also have 10 large capacity booster stations. They can move about 27,000 gallons a minute. And that's mostly to move water into the higher elevation, into the benches, because most of our sources are down in the lower zones of the system. We have to move the water up the benches to get water into some of the other water zones. We also have 33 PRVs. A PRV stands for pressure reducing valve, and these are various diameter. And so when we have a zone break, and we'll talk about zone breaks in just a second, there's a map over here on the wall. We'll talk a little bit about the water zones. When we have a zone break, we have to break that zone up with PRVs. Now, a PRV basically is a valve that is clamped shut, and when water is needed, there's a setting on both sides of it. When the water is needed to go through it, you open the valve a little bit, and it actually makes a lot of friction in that valve, because that's how they break down the pressure. It's intentionally done that way. And so they have to be maintained. That's part of Ryan's job, is to maintain those 33 PRVs. And by the way, 8 of those are privately owned. Do you have a question?
Sorry, I'm back on your, the water storage. You mentioned that it will increase by 10 million gallons in 2017. So 6 million of that is the new tank or the new reservoir, but 4 million is just a replacement of the Slate Canyon, or where's the other 4 million coming from?
So there's 2 tanks that are under construction. The 6 million is over on Columbia Lane.
Right.
There's another 4 million that's over just west of Slate Canyon Drive.
So that's a different reservoir? I thought that was just a replacement of the current one over there.
That is a new reservoir. However, the existing Slate Canyon reservoir, it's in pretty dire straits. We're not going to take it off. At least right now, the plan is not to take it offline. It's 5 million gallons of storage. The difficulty that we have with the existing Slate Canyon reservoir, when it was built, it's 17 feet lower than the main and the gallery. The main and the gallery are the 2 reservoirs that a lot of people know about east of the MTC. Slate Canyon, I'm not exactly sure what the thinking was when Slate Canyon was built, but it's 17 feet below those 2 reservoirs. Typically, that's not how you build reservoirs. You build them the same elevation. So the 2 reservoirs that are under construction right now, they're the exact same elevation. They work together. So when one fills, the other one fills. It's not quite that easy during peak day demands, but Ryan will tell you that's nice in theory. It doesn't always work. But anyway, the 17 feet difference, during the summertime, we cannot fill the existing Slate Canyon reservoir all the way because of the head loss in the system. So we only fill about half of that reservoir during summertime. In the non-peak times, we can fill that reservoir completely up. So right now, what the plan is to use that reservoir as we can and basically store extra water that will be dumped into the new Slate Canyon reservoir. So we're not going to abandon that reservoir completely. Eventually, we will get there, but right now the plan is to still use it as much as we can.
And I think that's different than what we originally understood.
There was a question at one time whether we ought to just take that reservoir completely offline.
I think that was the thought was that it was not going to last when it needed to be replaced. So
It's
close. I mean, it'll hold on for a little longer then, so that's good news.
Ryan will tell you, how many years do you think we'll have left in the existing
Yeah,
Slate
that
Canyon?
tank was built in 1970, so as far as tank life goes, we're not expired. However, it was built on an old dump area. We've got a lot of bad ground underneath that wasn't properly compacted, replaced, whatever. We've already had a quarter, if you take the wall around that tank, 1/4 of that has already sunk. And we had to come in and pour cement, rejack the ceiling back up. So it's got a pretty good Band-Aid on it. It is working, and it is meeting all water standards. But it is something we need to look at.
So when the new tank is complete, will we continue to put money in that old one to keep it going, or just use it till it runs out?
We'll use it to the point.
to the point where we've got an issue that we feel either structurally or from a water quality standpoint, we're jeopardizing something that we don't want to jeopardize, and we'll take it offline at that point. Please.
I was just going to make the point, Dave. We've planned the Slate Canyon tank, the West Zone 2 tank, to have a second chamber built at a later date. And at that time, we would feel comfortable taking the current Slate Canyon tank offline.
Sounds like the current Slate Canyon tank would go offline in any substantial earthquake.
I think most of us would say yes to that question.
Would any others?
I'm not 100% sure on the gallery. Many of the council members toured the gallery. That's the reservoir that has the volleyball court on it near the MTC. And it was built in 1935, and I think that makes it 80 plus years old, 90 years, something like that. And it is a very old tank. It obviously was not designed for seismic conditions. However, it's buried. I think that's a big plus for it. I don't know exactly how it, and obviously, you know, until you have that kind of an event happen, you don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Or it wasn't designed for it.
No. Hang on, we'll do that at the end.
I might add,
please.
on that tank, the design on the interior is so beautiful. The columns are just like going to Greece or somewhere. It's really nice.
By the way, Gary just mentioned, we do have a tour of the new Slate Canyon tank. The new Slate Canyon tank is finished. They're getting ready to the point where you could actually put it in operation. We won't do that until the other, the Columbia Lane tank is also ready to go online at the same time. But if the council's interested, we could probably do that in the next week or two.
It has to happen the next week because we're ready to start filling it. So it's cleaned out, it's ready, it's not, so.
I'd like to do that, but only if it has Corinthian pillars.
It does not have the same pillar design, I'm sorry.
I would like to see that.
This is your one chance to go into a tank, okay? So
Without a
if you're
wetsuit.
interested, contact me and we'll get you in. It has to be within the next week.
How about if we'll coordinate that with Cliff? We'll ask Gary to do that and coordinate that with Cliff and make sure that happens.
Guaranteed not to turn the water on road in the tank. Depends on your age.
And gender.
That only happens when these two guys are, they've got their operators in the tank. I've heard a few stories about that happening, so they think that's fun to do, so. Just a couple of the conversions that I want to make sure that you understand. Occasionally you see a graph or an explanation in cubic feet. That's about 7.5 gallons. And a conversion there on cubic feet per second. I know these are engineering terms. About 450 gallons per minute, and 1 million gallons a day equates to about 700 gallons per minute. I'll try. I apologize if I slip back into the lingo and I don't explain something. Raise your hand and make sure that you understand those terms. We're going to go very quickly then through. Please.
Sorry, just as you're talking about that, you know, I was looking at the 35,000 gallons per minute peak use, trying to grasp that in my mind. I mean, it's one thing to talk about the buckets, but I just a couple days ago I was walking along the Provo River, and it's starting to swell, and it's flowing a pretty good clip. And 50 gallons a day, or the 35,000 gallons per minute, is roughly 1/4 of what the Provo River's flowing at right now. And so that helped me kind of visualize what kind of flow rates we're happening.
Yeah, every once in a while, I'm shifting topics here just a tad. Every once in a while, we get questions asked about a storm. You know, you hear the term a 10-year storm or a 25-year storm. Man-made culinary water systems don't even come close to what a storm can dump on Provo City. So if we go and open a fire hydrant, even several fire hydrants, and try to mimic what a storm is looking like in a neighborhood, you're not even getting close to it. So Mother Nature is, you know, even though we're talking a lot of gallons here, Mother Nature can outdo us pretty easily. So let me see if this is, there we go. So these are the 7 topics that I mentioned before that I've sent to the mayor. I put a lot more information underneath these, and again, if you're interested in getting what I sent to the mayor, I'd be happy to send it to the council. I can send it to Cliff, and he can send it out to the council. We have not made a decision at this point about any other topic as far as the order. So if the council leadership wants to weigh in on next topics, would be happy to get a little bit of direction from the council. I bring this map up because you'll see a similar map up on the wall, and we're going to refer to it a number of times. But our water zones, I mentioned water zones before in the explanation. These water zones are typically broken down by contour elevations in a city, and in the western United States, where we have a lot of elevated tanks, we use the elevation to build pressure. And so we color-coded our water zones and the corresponding tanks the same color so that you can see where the tanks that supply those water zones sit. They're usually, not always, but they're usually about 250 feet uphill from the lowest point in the water zone. So from down here to this point is usually about 250 feet. You'll build about 110, 120 PSI. Right now, this is actually more than 250 feet. It's about 350 feet. And it's part of the reason that we are, part of the reason that we are breaking that particular zone into 2 parts. We had too high of a pressure. We were up in the 130, 150 range when demand was not very high. And for that kind of pressure out by the airport, there's really, we're almost working against ourselves. We're blowing out pipes and some other issues as far as soil erosion or corrosion issues on our pipes. We were seeing some issues coming up with the water system. So one of the recommendations in the master plan was to split that zone into 2 parts. So the yellow tanks are the 2 tanks that we talked about, one on Columbia Lane and one on Slate Canyon. We also have existing water zones up in the foothills. I do have to tell you, particularly the purple zone is very simplified. If you look in the master plan, and if you get a copy of the master plan, and we do have copies, by the way, if you'd like a full-blown copy of the master plan, we have a copy here, and we can hand it out. In the master plan, that purple zone is broken into 20, how many, Ryan? 26 different water zones. And we'll talk about why it is a little bit, help you understand, but for simplification purposes, I wanted to illustrate that as one total water zone. And we'll tell you why, what the issue is there. You can also see other zones further up into the hills and where the tanks sit. Any questions, any concerns on that?
So you will go into why there's 26 zones.
So let me hand out, we have a copy of the executive summary. I know it was sent electronically, but we did make hard copies for everybody. We'll hand this around. I should have done this a little bit earlier here. And we got plenty. If there are finance committee members that would like a copy, we've got plenty of copies here for everybody. And this is the full executive summary. I do need to tell you a little bit about the master plan history. And in doing this, I'm going to back up here just a tad. So the very first master plan that I can find for Provo City is this master plan right here. It was done in 1961. And you can see how thick it is. It's an interesting master plan, especially from a historical standpoint. I've read through the entire master plan, and very informational. The next master plan that I want to bring up is one that was done in 1979. It was a group out of New York City that did it. You can see how thick it is. It's an interesting master plan. It had $11 million worth of improvements that were recommended. You got to remember that's in 1979 dollars, but $11 million of improvements recommended in this master plan. The next one is this one done in 1989, and you can see how thick it was, thick it is. There are some concerns about this master plan, and I can go into a little bit of detail if you want to know, but in this master plan, they had $1.6 million of improvement recommended in it. And again, I can tell you a little bit about what some concerns are with that master plan.
On those 11 to 1.6, did they spend that kind of money, or so are you saying that we didn't spend any of that and now?
Well, some of it was spent. There were a number of things that were done from the 1979 master plan that were part of the master plan, and some good progress was made, especially in line replacement. One of the concerns was the age of the line, and in one of the later master plans, they actually said that about 70 miles of the older system had been replaced over the last 20 years. So my reading of the master plan in around 2000, there was a 2002 water rights study, and they did a little bit of the master plan then. That was where the comment was made. So probably from 1980 until 2000, they had replaced about 70 miles of the water system. So some pretty reasonable progress. They have, and again, some of I need to be careful, the senior council members, I don't mean that in terms of age, by the way. So the older, the longer tenured council members will know that there was a couple of recommendations for 2 tanks in that master plan, in the 1979 master plan, and they were not built. And that is a concern. One was recommended in 1980, another one in 1985, and neither one was built. So the next 2 studies that I want to bring up so that you get a perspective is this one right here. This was started in 2000, finished in 2002. This is a water rights study by and large. It is very detailed, and you're going to get 60 minutes of water rights basically out of this book if you really want that much on water rights. It's a lot of information. But in the back there is 1 chapter, and they do make a few recommendations. There's a little bit of hydraulic modeling that was done to generate those recommendations, but that is one of the studies that was done, and again, mostly a water rights study. And then the next one that was done is the one that we handed out, the executive summary, in 2010. It was started, finished in, the original draft was done in December of 2011. And there was also an impact fee and rate study that was done and associated with that master plan. The reason that I bring up the master plans and the history of the master plans is there is some concern in reading through the master plans and looking at the difference and the time period between 1979 to the current master plan. There were some gaps, I think, at least in my opinion. To put it in perspective again, $11 million in 79 was recommended, 1.6 in 89, and then in the current master plan, the recommended improvements is $60 million of improvements. And that's part of the reason, just those dollar amounts, I hope helps to explain some of those concerns that I'm trying to express really in a very, very short period of time. We'll try to get a little bit more detail. So I'm going to start right into the master plan, the executive summary. You can follow along if you'd like, if you want to take some notes. I'm not going to go through every single page. And again, if I'm going too fast or if you want to ask some questions, don't hesitate to stop me. The first page in the executive summary talks about some of the changes that had happened recently in Provo City. So especially in 2010, there was a general plan amendment that was done, and also some annexation on the west side of Provo that had happened. And it made some modifications in the water demand just because of annexation and also population. So on the bottom of the first page, they have some projection numbers as far as future needs of Provo City as far as water goes. And you'll notice it's in acre feet, and that's why I converted the 9 billion gallons for you to 27,500 acre feet, so that you can look at this chart and hopefully make a little bit of sense, okay? So in 2010, and we'll look at the annual only right now, with water conservation, everything going per the state requirements, this is what they were recommending that we achieve for each of these years. So our current demand and I'm trying to make an emphasis here, our current demand right now is only 27,500, okay? So the water model has projected a fairly high, a fairly conservative amount of water, if you want to use that word, a fairly conservative amount of water, maybe more so than what we're using. And you'll see that in some graphs as we move forward. If we do not conserve water, these are the amounts in acre feet. Again, I want to point out peak day. This is in million gallons per day. It's right there. And I specifically pointed out our peak day in 2016 was 50 million gallons. Okay, so we're still under the demands, pretty significantly under the demands. We have in the past, I need to point this out, we have in the past exceeded the 50 million gallons. In the past, we've been up in the 56 to 58 million gallons a day range. And the next graph will kind of help you to see why we're trending down. Actually, there's some good news here. So this is your question, please.
Just based on our current pumps and wells in our system now, how much could we supply if we went all out?
Well, right now, and it's part of the reason I put the fact sheet together the way I did, right now our wells, we could produce 32 million gallons a day, which isn't quite, it's not even, it's at 50 million gallons, the average is about 35,000 gallons a minute. So our wells alone could not keep up, almost, but not quite. If all of our wells plus the springs were going and everything that is working just perfectly, we can pretty much keep up with the demand. But we don't have a lot of leniency. And when you start to factor in the fact that our wells are not, they're mechanical systems, they fail. Ryan will tell you that it's pretty common during the summer to have at least one well offline. There's been times where we have 3 or 4 offline. Am I right, Ryan?
Absolutely. We've got 2 out of the ground right now.
And it's not July right now. That's why we're working on them right now. But
so I'm just wondering how we're going to meet those demands in the future.
You're jumping a tad ahead of me here. If that's okay, Dave, please.
So I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So we are well below what we projected we would need at this time, but our current capacity is about what we're using now. If we were actually using what we projected we would be using, we wouldn't have the capacity to provide that.
So right now, let me try to explain it this way. Right now, during the summertime, we take about 5 CFS, and I know I'm using a term there, about 5 cubic feet per second from our surface water, and I'm jumping ahead here, but we have surface water rights up in Deer Creek and Jordanelle. We'll talk a little bit more about those, but right now we can run that water. We have to pay for treatment through Central Utah's treatment plant in Orem, and we take that water into the Gillespie Weir to supplement the springs. If the springs are running really well and we can get 10,000 gallons a minute out of them, and all of our wells are running, we could probably produce close to 50,000 gallons a minute. That's ideal. That's not reality for these 2 guys sitting in the back here. So I think our sources, they're pretty close to being maxed out, I think is
50,000 gallons per minute, not 50 million gallons per day.
Yep. Okay. So I'm saying we're getting 32,000 from wells, another 10 on top of that, so we're up at 42, and it may not be 50,000. What do we get from Central Utah, Ryan?
Yeah.
In terms of gallons per minute?
5 CFS, pretty standard during the summer months. It's about 2,500 gallons per minute.
So we probably are in the 45 range, 44,000 gallons a minute. So one of the things that I want the council to understand, we are trending down as far as water use. The 2002 water rights study that I referred to, they looked at the previous 10 years from 1990 to 2000, and the trend was up. It was definitely going up, and that's partly why the same consultant that did the water rights study did this master plan study that I handed out to you. And part of the reason you may be asking, well, why did they use numbers. Why did they choose to use numbers that are going higher than our actual uses? Well, the previous 10 years, it was going the other direction. It was all increase. But from 2000 to 2010, we are definitely on a downturn, and this is in billions of gallons. So even back in 2000, we were above 10 billion gallons. We're down in the 9 billion gallons pretty consistently now. And you can
Why are we down, Dave?
So a couple of things. The master plan, talks about water conservation. I think part of it is water conservation, but I think we need to be a little careful. I want to make sure that the council understands there's some reality of things that have happened between 2000 and 2010 in the system that may account for some of that water outside of the water conservation. The biggest one is BYU has moved most of their green fields onto secondary water. They have water rights that come from the canals that are on the east side, the east bench of Provo, and they are exercising a lot more aggressive action to take culinary systems off and use secondary water from the canal companies. So it's probably one of the biggest factors, in my opinion, why it's going the other direction. And in fact, just a side note, Stadium Avenue, several of you know that Stadium Avenue is going to be under construction this year. BYU, in conjunction with the city, they're putting in, what's the size of the line? Is it 12-inch? 12-inch secondary line down Stadium Avenue with that project. And their goal, if you look across the street and where that's headed, their goal is to get it to across the parking lot at Canyon Road over to University, and they've got an intramural field that's over there on University, and they want to convert that to secondary water. Please.
So usage is going down while population increased over those 16 years. So our consumption per capita,
it's going down.
Is diving even more drastically.
It is. These are good numbers from a conservation standpoint. I just want to make sure you know it may not all be attributed to conservation in the truest form of conservation. So
at one point we stopped putting water in the street ditches and we kind of cut off that. Was that reflected in this at all? Or?
It's actually not. 1979 is when the irrigation system was stopped in Provo. From a water rights perspective, that had an impact, but I don't feel like that played a significant role. I don't know. The reason I say that is I don't know how many people were participating still in 1979 on that. If we had a really solid number that said, hey, we've got 10,000 residents that are still irrigating in the traditional form, we probably could make some assumptions about that difference. But I'm not quite sure how many people were still doing that.
I remember living in Major in the 80s, we still had water going to the ditches, and then that was cut off. So that's what I'm referring to, not the 79.
Major Park had it running out front until what, 2006, 2007?
And I guess that's my question too, is those canals that BYU are using, I know that I've heard that there's a lot more water rights available than there actually is water. And so as those canals, are those going to be disappearing that BYU is using, or what's our use, what's the potential for that loss?
We'll get into that in just a second as far as it pertains to Provo City. There is a concern. There's a legitimate concern throughout the water right industry, if I can say it this way. There's always a concern about how much paper water rights you have versus how much wet water you have. That's a phrase that you'll hear a lot in water rights. And in wet years, this year, based on the snowpack, everything that we're seeing in the mountains, water rights are going to be, easy. I mean, we're just going to have a ton of water, and I don't see a lot of issues with water rights. You get into dry years, that's when the real difficult times start to happen. You go through a drought, and people start to say, hey, I've got a water right, and it's a senior water right, and I'm going to take the water from a junior water right owner, and how much are they going to get in a fight over that? And is the state going to be involved? There are some concerns. I can't speak for BYU. I don't know a lot about their water rights and how solid, how senior those water rights are. I can speak for Provo, and we do have a lot of senior water rights. This is the same map that you see on the wall, and by the way, some of these maps are not in the book. The reason that I have the map here is the next page in the summary. And please again, cut me off when my time is up. We're behind. I guarantee it. So I want to make sure that you understand a couple of things about the facility. So this map shows the tanks. We've added the wells that are in the red dots, and then also the booster stations are in the triangle. What are they? Orange. So again, we're going to go through some of this very quickly. The next couple of pages talk about the springs, the wells. There's some information there. I'm not going to go through it in detail. If you want to read through that, it's a very, very quick summary on page 2. They also talk about surface water. I've mentioned, or excuse me, our surface water. So I've mentioned a little bit about surface water. Provo City has one of the biggest water rights on the Provo River belongs to Provo City, and it came through what they call the Morris Decree. In the early 1900s, there was a adjudication that happened on water rights in Provo, and Provo received a healthy majority of the water rights in Provo River, and they call them the direct flow rights. And we'll try to calculate, we'll try to help you understand how significant those water rights are. We also, on the next page, they go in to talk about a couple of surface water or storage water. So in Deer Creek, I've mentioned we have water in conjunction with the Metropolitan Water District. The district is entitled to up to 8,000 acre-feet of water. Now, the last 5 years, they have not received that total amount. It varies depending on the snowpack, and so we've received somewhere between 50 and 80% over the last 5 years. That water is sold to Provo City. We buy that from the Metropolitan District, and then Ryan uses part of that water for what they call exchange water. So the springs that come out of South Fork, we have to put the water back in Provo River in some of our spring water rights. So he takes the water, instead of returning spring water, which is good drinkable water, instead of returning that to Provo River, we take the surface water out of Deer Creek and put it back into Provo River. So it's a better quality water that we're keeping, but we have to return that flow into Provo River for what we take out of the springs. So we use that water. That's part of what we use. We don't use all. If we got 8,000 acre-feet from Metropolitan Water, we usually don't use all of it, and they call that carryover water. So every year, Provo City has a little bit of extra water, and when I say a little bit, it's sometimes a little bit more than a little bit. So Ryan, right now in Deer Creek, how much carryover?
13,000 acre-feet.
So it's roughly half of what Provo City uses. We have stored. If we had to rely on Deer Creek entirely, we have about 13,000 acre-feet of carryover water. By the way, when we have really wet years, Provo City is subject to losing some of that water in Deer Creek, and it spills. They call it a paper spill. Again, it's an issue of water rights. I'm not going to get into the details of this today, but we are trying. We're working really hard. It's probably one of the most important things that's happening right now relative to water rights from a staff level. Is we're trying to move water into Jordanelle. The next thing that's described in the master plan on this page is Jordanelle water storage. Provo City with Metropolitan Water, we have 10,000 acre-feet of storage, not water. We have storage. Think of it as empty boxes. In Jordanelle, we have 10,000 acre-feet of water. If we can get it there somehow, we have the right to store it. Provo City has 2 water rights that are above the Jordanelle. They're called the Lost Lake water rights. That's our only way of getting water into Jordanelle from upstream of Jordanelle. Right now, staff and Gary's spending a lot of time with Ryan and other people in trying to get a mechanism for us to move our Deer Creek water, which is subject to loss this year especially, and move it up to Jordanelle. It's something that is, again, very, very important that we're working on. And it's partly back to your question about future water use. If our water rights stay about stagnant from a well and spring perspective, the place that we need to get water is surface water. So the importance of Deer Creek and Jordanelle is going to become more important as the years go on.
So we wouldn't be developing more springs or more wells. We would look to use water that we could reclaim, that we could send through the Central Region Water District and clean and
We do have
to our supply.
We do have some well rights that have not been developed yet, and we'll get into that in just a second. We have some additional wells, but that water right is not going to be enough to meet the growth as they projected. Now, keep in mind, their projections are high, okay? So it's kind of a balancing game. We have to keep, well drilling, things like that going, and we'll talk a little bit about aquifer mining here in just a second.
Okay. I wanted to ask too, if the wells, when you do dig them, if your right is to dig on that particular place, or if your right is to get water wherever you decide to dig. Does that make sense?
So we have to submit, jumping ahead a bit here, but our well, it's okay. Our well water rights are consolidated largely, not all of them, but largely consolidated into one water right. This was done back in 1979. And we have multiple points of diversion. That's what they call where we decide to drill a well, is we have to send it into the state engineer and say, this is exactly where we want to drill that well. And we think we're going to get this much water. When we finally produce it, we have to go back to the state engineer and say, this is how much water we're actually producing at that well. And he looks at our entire water right and said, you have 10 wells that are producing 20,000 gallons a minute or whatever it is. You've maxed out that right, or you still have 10,000 gallons a minute that you can produce out of those, so you can drill another well. So that's probably an oversimplification of how we get permission to drill a well, but that's essentially what we do. Some of them are very specific. You get a water right that says this only can be taken from this point of diversion, and you have to go through a change application in order to change that. With the state engineer. Some of them are consolidated into a massive water right.
How close are you maxing out our ability to?
We still have, so in 1991, the city bought a water right called the Umpa water right. You've probably heard of that, referred before. It was probably the most recent significant water right purchase that the city has done. We have about 6 or 8 wells, I think, left to, is it 4? Only 4?
Yeah, if you take Lions out of that, it's 4 left.
So with Lions, it was 5, but we have 4 other wells that we have gotten permission from the state engineer to drill. And there is a little bit of a question about where those wells ought to be drilled. When the water right was originally produced, there was a study that showed those wells being drilled in the bench areas. What we're finding is our Temp View well. There was a well that was drilled up in Rock Canyon just before I got here. Those wells are only producing, even after they're developed really hard, they're only producing about 1,200 gallons a minute, versus our North well and Lions Park and our well 88 that kind of sit in the middle. They kind of straddle the Provo River. They're producing 35,000+ gallons a minute. Our North well produces, when it was first drilled, 5,000 gallons a minute. There are cities along the Wasatch Front that would kill for a well like that.
Is Lions Park online yet? You're still working on it?
It's got some water quality issues that we're still trying to work out, but even after, and we'll talk a little bit about Lions, we were going after water that had not been tapped yet, and so we were going into some lower aquifers, and it proved it didn't prove out the way we were hoping, but even after sealing the lower part of the well, it still produces 3,500 gallons a minute. We were up at 5,500 gallons a minute originally at Lions Park.
You talk about we hold water rights in conjunction with the Metropolitan Water District. Isn't Metropolitan Water District Provo? And why did we form a district separate from Provo? Or is it somehow they think it's theirs?
You're getting into a topic that I wasn't planning to cover that today.
Maybe we just cover personally.
That's fine. The only other thing that I'll mention very quickly on this page is the treatment plant. And the treatment plant is a Central Utah treatment plant. And generally we take about 5 CFS through it. Right now that equates to about 1,500, between 1,000 to 1,500 acre feet of water per year. So Out of the 27,000 acre feet, 28,000 acre feet of water Provo uses, only about 1,500 of it come from surface water right
Doesn't that
now.
save us a lot of money in treatment?
What's that?
That would be a big, huge savings.
It is. And by the way, I'll just very quickly note, as far as cost of water, the treatment that we pay for Central Utah, because we're not paying for the water, it's our water, they're just treating it, we pay about $95 per acre foot. So I converted that into thousands of gallons because we bill in thousands of gallons. So you can kind of look at the bill and say, how much are we actually paying for the water versus other infrastructure? That water costs us 30 cents per 1,000 gallons out of the treatment plant. Well water costs in the teens, somewhere between about 12 to 15 cents per 1,000 gallons. And it depends on if you want to capitalize the well. If it's a brand new well like Lions Park, if you capitalize the well cost, it goes up into 25 cent per 1,000 gallon. Our spring water obviously is the cheapest water. And by the way, this is not including pumping costs to get spring water up into the higher benches. Our spring water runs about 2 to 3 cents per 1,000 gallons. Okay. Right now we charge about $1.20 per 1,000 gallons, if I'm not mistaken. Jimmy, where's Jimmy? $1.20. So we'll talk about what we're trying to make up here. Let me see. This is also a map of just to help you understand where some of the water comes from. The Big Springs South Fork is shown on the map. You know, we almost circle back on the city by the time you get up to Big Springs. And again, this is just to illustrate where a lot of our water comes from. By the way, Rock Canyon, we do still take some water from Rock Canyon. Not a lot, but we do get water, spring water out of Rock Canyon. So this table right here goes back a little bit to some questions about availability versus water rights. So this is a summary of sources of water that Provo City has in an average year and a dry year, and how much water we can produce in an acre foot. So this is based on looking at water rights, and again, you can see these numbers down at the bottom versus what we're using right now in the range of 27,000, 28,000 acre feet. So again, our water rights are pretty solid from an annual basis. Remember, this is annual water. In the future, our water rights, this is, you can see we're increasing a little bit as far as our development of UMPA water rights. This is the water right here that I mentioned, where we have some wells that we still need to drill. So again, you can compare these numbers back to the beginning projections on the master plan and see if we're within the demands. The easiest way to look at those two comparisons is actually on this chart right here. So we just put in, the consultant actually put in the water rights and the quantities. This is in acre feet along this side, and put in projections that they had on that very first page that I explained. So this blue line is projections with conservation. This dashed purple line is projections without conservation. Remember that very first page that we talked about? So the projections are quite high again. The yellow line, interestingly enough, is our actual uses. And I actually had Jimmy add this. This is the exact same chart, but we added a couple of more years on that chart. And you can see we are holding well below even the projected amounts that they have in the master plan. By the way, this has a domino effect in some other things that we'll talk about in the future. So any questions there?
Why does our Deer Creek share narrow significantly about 2016, 2017?
Ryan, do you have, this is the 18, this is the, is that the subscription water that's up in, that's not the subscription water. Shane?
It's not narrowing. We've just added Big Springs in at 2016. So that little cyan strip has boosted.
I'm looking at the orange section there.
See the way it narrows right there?
bottlenecks?
So that's our exchange water. So Big Springs is exchanged for Deer Creek. So the water that we get out of Deer Creek goes down, but Big Springs goes up. So it's not, we're not gaining necessarily, we're just.
Okay. We're pulling that in and then giving more of our Big Spring, or sorry, more of our Deer Creek into the river. Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
One of the other things that that I asked to include in the original executive summary, this was actually not included. So the previous map or the previous graph, you'll notice up there in parentheses on the top it says a dry year. So our water rights oftentimes have to shrink depending on how much moisture we get during the snowpack. So they vary a little bit. Water rights are not necessarily, not always, but not necessarily just a solid number that you always see, you get every year, especially surface water. I've already explained a circumstance where the water that we get from metropolitan water can be shrunk depending on the snowpack. So our water rights will vary. But in the master plan itself, back in, I think it's in chapter 3, they actually showed the same graph in an average year. So you can see without, this is without water conservation. In the previous graph right here, about 2040, without water conservation, they were showing us running out of water rights. In an average year, without water conservation, in their projections, we still have enough water. So again, I think they're being, I think the point that I'm trying to make here is they're being relatively conservative in the projections and the water rights. So very quickly in the summary, here's just a couple of things that they talk about. They talk about the dry years meeting the potential. As long as we meet conservation, we're fine. But it says without conservation, we may have some shortfalls. They talk about the water conservation during the last 5 years. We've done a couple of things that the state likes. We've changed a couple of ordinances. The state goal over there on the third line from the bottom, 25%. We're well on the way because they let us use our 2000 water production. It was one of the highest years, and it's not unique to Provo. Other places had the same issue. And so the fact that we're declining, we're going the other direction as far as water use, it's a good thing from the state's perspective.
So when you say conservation, that's not asking citizens to water on certain days. That's a different type of conservation. In the past, you've said that would actually backfire with citizens using, or residents using more water on their water days than they would have if they just watered every day.
Yeah, so this is why I'm trying to be careful about the topic of conservation, because again, the graphs and some things that have happened with our water system, it's a little tough to argue that this is all truly conservation. But in my past experience, I've seen cities that have much tighter water rights, and especially in extended drought times, they have said, hey, we're going to limit watering to 2 or 3 days a week. And in many cases, I've seen it backfire on the cities because instead of only watering those 3 days, if you get rain one of those days, and I've actually had neighbors say this to me, well, it rained today, but it wasn't quite enough water on my lawn, so I'm going to water anyway because I can't water tomorrow. And that mentality starts to dig in, where if it rains on the day that you're supposed to water and you don't feel like it got enough, they'll water anyway. And that's exactly what water conservation doesn't want to have happen. And so you need to be a little careful about how you talk about conservation if you want to really tighten down into restrictions. The master plan, when they talk about water conservation, it's more in a broad scheme where they say develop landscaping changes. This is one of the things the council did in the last couple of years, where we modified our ordinance and said your landscaping in the front yard used to be completely grass. We were just all water eating stuff on the front lawns. Well, we've modified that and said xeriscape, a little bit of rock, make it look nice. But we've made some modifications that are less intensive water uses. So I think when they talk about conservation, that's what they have in mind. It's not let's restrict how much people are using.
Let me see if I understand this graph simply. So right now you told us we're using 27,500 average acre feet a year.
Right.
And we can produce in 2016, 50,000. So when Merrill Bingham used to tell me we have adequate water even in dry years, he was right.
So as long as, I think what they're saying, as long as we stay on conservation goal, and we're well there. I mean, you can, this is the conservation goal, and here's where we're at right now. We're doing okay.
Compared to other cities, you're probably in really good shape.
We're doing pretty well.
Mr. Decker?
Please.
Are you getting close to a logical breaking point where we can continue at your next presentation?
We can stop anytime you want. There's really not, I mean, we cover a lot of topics. So if you'd like me to, this is what I was concerned about. I told the mayor, this is potentially 2 hours.
Well, we're about over a half hour behind schedule. We've got a lot of small items to talk through. If that's all right, can we just pick up right where we're at?
We're happy to come back.
Is there any last questions on what we've covered so far? And then we'll pick it up next time.
I have a few, but I think I'll say them.
Okay. All right.
And you said you had a copy, so this is like an executive summary of the master plan. Did you have a copy of the master plan that you said would be available, or is this what you've given us?
We do. We have copies. The easiest way is to send it electronically. So if the council would like a copy of the entire master plan, we can send that electronically. How many pages is it, Gary?
This is the size of it right here.
160.
And that's doubles.
Yeah, if you would send that electronically.
And this executive summary is about 20 pages, so.
We're happy to come back in 2 weeks and finish.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great deep dive there.
So how many people are interested in the tour within the next week? You will be going down 25 feet into a hole that's dark.
On a ladder.
Okay, on a ladder. You'll have a harness on you, so it'll be safe somewhat. So, but if you're interested, check with Cliff. The afternoon would probably be the best. You just work out a day and we'll make it happen, okay? And so, this is your one shot to go into the tank. Once we clean them up, you don't let people in, so. Yeah?
Thank you very much. We're scheduled for a break. Can we just make it about a 5-minute break?
No break.
No break. Mayor doesn't want to have to go.
That's the water discussion, means everybody needs the restroom.
Which leads to the next discussion, right?
Solicitation of all for
I decided not to take the reminder from the which means it's going to be empty to your restrooms, and I just wanted to
about a possible first step on this. Whenever we create a new city board that's kind of setting in motion something that could last for a very long time. So my suggestion is that a first step would be just kind of a best practice study. I was wanting to ask council staff if they could find us 10 cities that have our form of government that are at least as big as Provo, but not more than twice as big. There's one city in Salt Lake that fits that category, and that's Salt Lake. And we know they have a public works board. But then these other 9 cities, we could find out, do they have a public works board? If so, how's it working for them? What do they like, what do they not like? And if none of the others have them, that might tell us something too. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a possible first step. What do you think? I got one thumb up. Any other thumbs up?
So 10 different cities, similar situation, our form of government, what they have.
At least as big as ours, because we want to look ahead a little bit, but not more than twice as big.
Is there concern that there would be a negative having a public works board? You just didn't want that precedent?
Well, I just thought that, it's a significant effort and we'd be getting a lot of people involved. I don't personally know what the downside might be other than if they're not, if they haven't been shown to be effective by cities that have tried them. I think that would be good to know. So, here, you can.
Yeah, it would be hard to put an exact number or percent on it, but I think if you use energy as a template, you're talking somewhere between 25 and 30% of CAT's time. So it's just need to be aware that a board does take time and energy, and so I think to your point of if it's helpful, it's worth a third of somebody's time. But if it's not, then you're starting a board and a process that for decades will exist because somebody's not going to take it out if it's mediocre. And so as long as you're aware of that cost and what it is, then there's no reason not to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
I just know that the energy department is up to date with their infrastructure. I don't know if that has to do with the energy board or, but I asked yesterday, is there anything you need that you haven't had financially? If you know, where we have everything, I would say if we need to get it in the public works department, we're way behind. I know the years I spent in government and on the board, it's been extremely valuable for me to be on the board, and I think it's been helpful to have an advocate from the public sector for the department. So I can't see how it would be negative. I can see the negative in the time constraint. There is cost with time. I guess you have to ask CAD and Canvas, but they're going to say they're not going to want to alienate the board, so they're going to say that they're better than. I don't know.
I look at a lot of what it is, how this board is made up. I look at the energy board, and they've had some great people on that board that have a lot of knowledge and can contribute. I love our Parks and Rec board, and I love meeting with them every month and sitting with them. They're a different makeup. They don't go out and do the digging. They get in there and come up with ideas. But as far as actually telling the Parks and Rec how to actually do it, it doesn't happen. And I think that's what more of this board would need to be successful. They need that great knowledge around that.
I think it's worth pointing out that Public Works has some complexities that energy does not. Energy, you have one thing that you're supplying. Where Public Works, you have multiple things. And already we have what I would call sub-boards. You have an airport board, you have the TMAC falling underneath. That shows you the extra layers of complexity of the Public Works situation.
So previously, council's asked us to try and identify some comparable cities. So we started looking at the Intermountain states around us. We've come up with, including having to add 6 or 7 Utah cities for more comparatives. We've got 44 cities right now that are typically 50 or 80,000 people and above.
some of which are strong mayors, some aren't, some county seats, some aren't, that kind of thing. We've identified 10 of those 50 that have some kind of power, water, or energy board to work from. So we'll go back in. What I'm telling you is that our search is likely to take us then outside of the Intermountain States. We'll probably go nationwide to look for public works boards. And so we're happy to do that.
Sounds good. Just a quick clarification. It sounded like the question was you'd find 10, whether or not they had the boards, and because even knowing whether they have boards or not, that, you know, if only 10% have public works boards, that's telling in and of itself. But the comment I had was just listening to the conversation. I think it is very interesting to look at the different boards that we already have. You know, we talked about the energy board, and it has a very specific character and kind of role that it plays, which is different than the Parks and Rec board. Another board that we've been actively working with is the Metropolitan Water Board. Of course, different characteristics or whatever, but you could almost say that that's a board that has its role is one part. You know, there's overlapping between that and our public works, and so it's just, I think that's helpful to kind of consider. And then I hadn't thought about what the mayor talked about. You know, TMAC and the airport boards are boards that deal with certain functions within the works department. So I think that it's worth exploring more through comparative studies, best practices, and really defining what exactly the role would be.
Thank you. It just seems like other cities have gone down this road. Why not learn from their experience? And just as an example, in Salt Lake, the only thing I've done there is just hop on their website, and they do have a public works board. I think they call it a public utility commission or something. The mission statement looked good, but I just happened to notice there's 9 board members, and the website shows 4 of the seats as being vacant. So it just made me wonder. I'd like staff to contact them and see, I mean, is this a really active board that they feel is still helping with its original mission? You know, that kind of, that's the only reason. I'm actually fairly positive about the whole idea. That makes sense.
Am I part 2?
Part 2? Yes, you're part 2.
Okay.
Well, actually, before we go to part 2, so how do you feel about proceeding in that manner as we discussed?
I guess my concern is do we have a defined objective of what we're going to learn? If we're going to have a public works board, have we already defined why we need a public works board and what we're trying to accomplish with a public works board? And then we're going to go out to 10 cities, and they're going to have all their own little whys and whens and hows. And then I'm a little confused on what we're. I don't know, best practices are important, but if we've got a need and we want to put the board in to satisfy that need, then I don't care why Salt Lake, but there's a. I'm interested in why we're putting ours in and what we're trying to accomplish with it.
What I would like to accomplish with it is, as Mr. Stewart said, the water especially, water department, storm water, our infrastructure is not up to date. You know, I mean, they're struggling with funds. We had 20 years without an increase. I think there was hesitance to come to the council to ask for anything, and I don't know that I can qualify that, so I throw that out there. But I think there was some hesitance to come from conversations that I've heard, and I think it was a conversation. Anyway, I won't go into that, but I think that if we have a board, a public works board, you have one more advocate for getting what we need as far as infrastructure. This council has been very focused on making sure that we have the infrastructure. If we don't have infrastructure and we don't have a way to deliver water, there's a big problem. People just expect water. They expect to turn on their tap and water to come, and they expect the water to drain away from their home, and they expect to, all of these things to happen. And it's not going to win us any awards, but if we don't provide it, it's going to be a big problem. And so I think that this council can come and go, and the next council may not be focused. They may think, oh, they had, water rate increases and everything's probably fine. Well, even with this 5-year plan, I don't think that does everything it needs to do. And we know there's still need. And so I think if we have a board that's advocating, like the Parks and Rec Board advocated today, like the Energy Board advocates, they'll come and they'll say why we think, we need an energy rate increase, or why they think we need something. And I think it's a powerful thing when you have a group of citizens who have educated themselves, who have followed, they understand the need. And when they come to and say, this is a real need, I think that's compelling. And I think that we have a better chance of having some long-term follow through with, say, our 48-inch line coming out of the canyon. That's a 10-year plan to put money away to build that 48-inch transmission line. And if, say, in 3 years, we have a bunch of money set aside to build that, and there's another need, and all of a sudden it becomes, that's another, emergency need or something. If you have a board saying, no, this money we've saved for 5 years, we've saved for 8 years, whatever it is, we need to build this 48-inch line. We don't have a redundant line coming out of the canyon, and the one we do have is 60 to 90 years old. I think that's compelling. If you have a board that's following that understands what needs to happen, and then they can advocate, where I think it's maybe harder for a department head to stand up and say, oh, please don't do this to us, right? But if you have a board of citizens that are advocating as well, I think it's compelling.
I'd just like to build on that, where I worked with Louis Billings, and he did a lot of things right. And one of the things that he thought he was doing right was keeping the utility rates really low: electric, water, sewer, everything. And he felt that it attracted business. And I guess the problem with keeping all those rates too low for too long is now we have to play catch up. So different administrations will have different perspectives, as councils will. And so if you do have a board that just kind of is focused on that and is the advocate, it kind of keeps some consistency in the process.
How long is the tenure of a board member? It seems like it's not the same as a council member.
Not the energy board, we have people serve there 10, 15, 20 years, which to me was a symbolic.
And that's the question, I guess.
We can discuss that as far as when we set up the ordinance, set up the terms and tenure. I went to an APP convention, and they said these kind of boards should have tenure. They should be people that are on there for long periods of time versus maybe other boards, so they can have institutional knowledge, so they can actually help the administration and council, who might take over more rapidly than they would. That was the American Power Association recommendation on those kind of boards.
And I think having staggered terms is important too, so you don't have everybody turning over at the same time, and keep some longer term, just like we do here. And, that could all be worked out, the length of the term could be worked out.
Based on that conversation I had, I got the better promise to be on the board as long as he was in office. He was on Sunday.
So in answer to your question, Mr. Van Buren, I've sensed that there's a fair amount of interest on the council to at least explore this. I just thought that, and we'll need to allocate more time, I think, to decide if we really want to do it. I just thought it would inform our decision or our discussion to learn from the other experience of other cities that have gone down that path.
And then my comments were not whether to do a board or not. My comments were, we're gonna have staff do 10 cities and all this analysis to bring us back information that may or may not apply to what our problems are and our needs are, or should we just go forward with investigating how to put a board together, and if we want to put a board together? And that was mainly my comment.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. What are we going to get back from these boards? What are they getting back? What are other cities getting back that is helping their public works?
Right.
And the council and the administrations.
That's what I was hoping to find out.
it could also help us know what's the best way to, what's the best structure for that for terms and things.
All right, well, we are short on time, so
Dave Decker behind you would like to.
So if I can weigh in a little bit, a couple of things that I would ask the council to keep in mind. Overall, I'm generally supportive of this. We Public Works interacts with a couple of boards, the Airport Board, TMAC, we've had very positive. I think overall the staff has had very positive. We've had a couple of boards that we sometimes struggle with, and I think that's the only reason that I hesitate. But the one thing that I would suggest that the council keep in mind is there are a lot of interactions in public works. For instance, a lot of people would think, well, what do water rights have anything to do with the airport? And right now we are facing an issue. We're in the middle of negotiations on a legal document that has a direct connection between water rights and issues at the airport. And the difficulty that we have sometimes is making that connection with the public between divisions or between sections in public works, that they're not separate, they're not silos that act independently. And so I would suggest that the council keep in mind, having somebody that might serve on TMAC or somebody that might serve on Metro Water or in the airport board serve on the public works board also, so that they can make the connections between the sections and then go back to that individual board and say, here's why it's important for the airport to keep this in mind. Here's how water rights relates to the airport, or here's this big issue about the wastewater treatment plant and how the west side zoning is completely it's playing a major role in how big we build pipes on the west side. And so they can start to put some of those pieces together, how they interact. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I think the biggest issue is to make that connection for public works and understand it's not just one component. You can't just look at TMAC and say, oh, they're acting independent. In public works, we don't look at it that way.
Do you have suggestions with the makeup of that board? I mean, do you have other groups? So, and you mentioned airport, you mentioned TMAC, but if you sat down and thought about it, these are all components that would make a good public works board. Could you come back with something, a suggestion?
We could. We could even come back with a few, very significant topics. And I don't know if this is where the mayor's going to go on part two, but we're facing a major decision in Provo relative to a wastewater treatment plant. And frankly, I'm not sure if any staff member, including myself, can stand up in front of the council or the administration right now and say, this is absolutely the right thing to do as far as a treatment plant. And this is a really good topic for a board to tackle. And there's a lot of interplay. The West Side Planning Group has a major impact on the size of that lift station, the lines, everything. And we need to understand and have people that go back and say, we can't be lingering on density issues on the west side because you're holding out a lot of planning that needs to be happening. We've got CIP projects that need to be going out the door. And if we're debating whether it's 4 units per acre versus 10 units per acre on the west side, those are big differences for public works.
I think we need to schedule another discussion for the topic of whether or not we want to create the Public Works Board. And in order to move on, can I just ask for a quick vote of whether you'd like to have the best practice study before we have that next discussion?
I would move that we have staff look into what other cities are doing. And I'm not sure if I want a particular number. If you get to the point where you feel like you found the perspective and answer that we need, I don't want to spend any more time analyzing and looking if necessary, but it would be nice to know what's going on out there.
I would like to know what those boards are bringing back to the city. I mean, what questions they're actually answering and how they're participating with the public works.
The makeup of their membership.
What's that?
The makeup of their membership.
Can we combine those three comments in one motion?
Yep.
I'll second that. Any further discussion? How do we do that?
I said that I wrote notes that everyone said, and then I'll just have it as a substitute motion from Dave Connect with Dave Souls.
Any other discussion?
So do you think it's premature to have Mr. Decker come with a recommendation of what a board could look like? A public works board at that time, since we're gonna have a discussion.
I'd be happy to, let's include that in his next presentation as well.
Is that agreeable to you, Mayor? Or do you have the
I'm
second part
waiting
you
for
wanted to
part two
discuss?
here, which I think it all ties into this, so.
Can we have the vote on this, so we can move on to part two?
Well, I'd like to hear part two. I just got my curiosity.
It's really a separate.
But it also answers your question, I think.
Yeah. All we're trying to decide is whether we do the best practice study, and then we'll move on to part two. Any further discussion on that? All right, all in favor? So we've got, let's see. One more time. Okay, so Mr. Harding, Mr. Winterman, Mr. Connect, and Mr. Sewell in favor, and Mr. Gargarin, and Ms. Santiago, and did you vote, Mr. Stewart?
I'm in favor of moving ahead.
So, was that a yes or no, or an abstention on the motion?
Motion was to move ahead.
Was to move ahead with the best practice study? Okay, so add Mr. Stewart to the ayes.
And just to confirm, it was Kaling.
Okay.
I just want to hear the rest of it. That's why I want to vote on it.
Okay, this is one of those ideas that if you like it, it was mine. If you don't, it was Wayne's. Actually, it was Wayne's idea. I think it's a great idea. You've heard bits and pieces through this discussion, but there is a pretty substantial need to bring to head a wastewater treatment plant in the decision, or at least preparing for that decision. So one of our thoughts is to constitute a board. I won't call it a board, let's call it a task force, similar to the solar task force that we put together, of very qualified residents who have the ability to understand the detailed, complicated issues of a wastewater treatment plant decision, and task that board with existing, simply to bring that to a point where they're ready to make a recommendation. I think through that process, we would very likely have the nuts and bolts for an ongoing board, but without committing to an ongoing board when we started the process. And so if we kept in mind that this could be an ongoing board when we put it together, and I think Mrs. Santiago, now to your question of who would be on it, that would then be part of our recommendation of who should serve on this board, would also be a duplicate of who would also be an ongoing, what roles and positions should be there in an ongoing board. And, but that it would have a life. And at the end of that life, the council would be in a position to say, yes, this has been good, we like this, we can see the benefit of it, or we've now discovered all these complexities that just are breaking down and not working in the same way we expect it to work in energy. And if there was, if the council was receptive to that, I think we would start by modeling the basics of the energy board and overlay that with the complexities of a public works board and try to come up with a proposed framework for a task force that would start off with that in mind and then be potentially the basis for an ongoing board. You'd learn how much staff time it's taking to support the board, and you'd learn if it was really realistic for them to understand all the different divisions within public works on one board. I think you'd learn a lot from that process. And it would, I think it would start moving us in the right direction on making a decision on wastewater.
Can I just add a couple of clarifying comments? So this would be initially be an executive board, so it wouldn't formally require approval, but you would want.
I think we'd go through the motions as if it was, we'd do advice and consent like we do on the other boards, and just because if it does live on, everybody's going to want to have gone through that process. So we would mirror as closely as we could what we're doing with the energy board, with perhaps some modification in number of positions and things based upon what Dave kind of comes up with what's needed.
The other clarification that I would make is this board could essentially serve as the nucleus for a future public works board, but wouldn't necessarily, because obviously we'd have to go through a.
I think we'd tell the members that there was a specific time frame, a specific task. And you wouldn't be committed to keep any of them if you didn't want to. But you may also, in energy, we have a number of people on that board who don't come with an energy expertise. I think in this initial board, you'd want a lot of technical expertise that you may not want in an ongoing board. And so it may be heavily slanted towards engineers and people who already understand this industry.
So this would be a good test case to solve a specific problem, and like we said, get a feel for how it might work.
I don't think we need to do what we voted on then. I think it actually would say that into our conversation and pass forward. It's a better test than find out what other cities are doing.
It would also give us plenty of time to do, that study and best practices. So that could be going on while this task force is underway. So we wouldn't be holding it. We wouldn't hold up this test. Yeah.
I think we're talking about the same thing. I think we're talking about a public works board. I mean, that's essentially what we're doing, right? I mean, I think we're kind of headed in the same direction, just calling it different things. And so if we're going to go through the whole process anyway of putting a board together, why not call it a public works board and have their first assignment be the sewer plant item, right? I mean,
The only reason is I'd say I don't know that we want to continue. Let's see how it works.
Well, and we can always, and that's what the council's purview. If it's awful, then I don't think future councils would say, let's keep doing something that's not working. So.
For example, you're gonna have to put it in ordinance, and right now I wouldn't know how many seats to tell you to have. You wouldn't know if you want somebody predetermined to have an airport seat on there or a TMEC seat on there. And that's going to, I suspect that's going to take you a number of months to determine just what that looks like.
My suggestion to council is let us do the study that you asked in the previous motion. Work on this project as a task force or however, let it be kind of a precursor to, get some experience with it. But at the same time, let us identify what best practices are elsewhere so that if you choose to continue something on a permanent basis, we have some other insight to bring to you already when you go to make that decision.
I guess its purpose though, and it's the end goal, right? If your end goal is to figure out the sewer treatment plant issue, then it's perfect. But if your end goal is in 10 years to have a 48-inch line coming out of the canyon, then it's not perfect. And so that's where I think we're having different discussions on the end goal. The board kind of looks and feels like the same thing, but the end goal is different. So I think we should have that discussion too.
I would agree with you on that. I just think that when you set up depending on what it is you want to solve with having the board, in some ways you can effectively either insulate yourselves as council from some of the decisions and directives to the public works, or the flip side of that coin is that you not only insulate, but you also may perhaps lose some control over some of the policies that those departments do. So my suggestion is let's do the study and bring that back to you in the near future.
So I don't think we need a formal motion for the mayor to set this up, but we need some kind of indication of whether we are on board with the approach. So if you want to do a
motion.
We can do a motion too.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Stewart. You see second.
What is the
To do what?
I'm not sure what we're saying. Thanks, George.
You put it in your own words, Mr.
So
Stewart.
We have a motion to move ahead.
Motion to adjourn.
With the task force to study the sewer with the idea that task force could be turned into a public works board.
I would second that, realizing that not everyone on that task force would necessarily
Well,
go
no,
over.
it could turn into meeting the form of the board members.
Right.
Yeah, I would feel more comfortable if the motion was to create the task force to look at the sewer treatment plant question and let the rest of it just kind of implicit or understood, but not explicit.
Well, I think I meant it that way.
Okay.
Well, when you say create now, is this our responsibility or this the mayor's responsibility? And we'll do what we do with other committees.
I think he asks us to do formal. I'm going to have a best thing to say.
Just so we know what the words are, how we're using them.
Mr. Mayor, he wanted us to advise
So why are we voting on it? We can do it without a motion.
Because he wants our advice.
Well, not only that, I don't want to go down a path that you're not going to support, or, I mean, the task force is to bring you a recommendation. And if it's a task force that you're not interested in, we're not going to spend the time doing it.
Okay, so are we clear on the motion by Mr. Stewart? And we have a second by.
Can we read that? Because I think I'm not sure still.
Okay.
I mean, isn't the motion to respond to the mayor's request?
Create a task force, study the sewer treatment plant with the rest, the members of that task force would be with the rest consent of the council.
Is that what your request is? Okay. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second. This is pretty good discussion. Mr. Connect. Any further discussion on the motion?
Yeah, since there are two different goals here, can you just separate this out from the public works board? I mean, if you do that task force, that's a short-term goal, right? That's just for the sewer plant, with the idea that maybe some of those members could be on a public works board. But I don't want to let that get lost in the discussion. The whole point of having a public works board is not to fix a 2 to 3 year problem. The whole idea is to have advocacy into the future years when we're no longer here, yet there's still a board to still advocate for infrastructure and all the things that our public works departments will need that they've been lacking. And it's not just water, it's roads. I mean, there's so many areas that really need advocacy right now. And so I don't want this to get lost in this short-term goal or process.
My motion is not to get it lost, because if we could vote on the public works board, I'd go forward. I don't think we had the votes, so.
I don't know, do we? do we have support for that? I don't know.
I'm supportive of the idea, but I still would like to hear what's going on outside Provo. So I'm in favor of supporting the mayor, which is a separate issue, and then after we get the information back, and hopefully not a very long time, we can then have it up.
Discuss the public works board. Okay, I'm good with that then.
I see this as a twofer. I mean, we're not only helping with the mayor's goal, but we're also getting more information for ourselves about what a public works board would look like.
Okay, and I'm good with that. I just thought this was replacing
No.
this, what we originally set out to talk about. So.
Not anymore.
Okay.
We're hitting it from two angles. All right, any further discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Let's move on. So Mr. Harding has suggested on the West Side Planning Committee's recommendations, he's the chair of that committee, which is what?
Yes. Do we have a time when we need to have a date certain when this is coming back? The benchmarking for whatever you call it.
I was just assume when they're ready.
Yeah, my goal would be to see where we are in 2 weeks, and then hopefully have enough for you by the April 11th meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Harding and the other three council members have done a great job on the West Side Planning Committee. Tremendous amount of work has gone into that. It was suggested in the light of the fact that we are sending the recommendation to the planning commission, that we continue this item until we've heard their recommendation, and then we can have a more comprehensive presentation and discussion.
I just want to report back that we have fulfilled our task and we have recommendations and we look forward to presenting them.
Right, so if there's no objection, we'll move on to item number 6. Discussion on neighborhood boundary changes. Go ahead, Mr. Stratton. Try to do this as quickly as we can.
So, council members, preliminary to a deeper look at the neighborhood program, there were some areas in the neighborhoods that that we saw as potential for changes of boundaries, and various members of the community, neighborhood chairs have come to us and said we'd like to entertain some changes. The 3 we're presenting to you today are pretty non-controversial. The chairs we've talked to are all in favor of them. The 3 changes are in the Lakeview, the Sherwood Hills, and the downtown areas, and I'll point those out to you specifically. Lakeview North, the proposal is to take this neighborhood or this part of the Lakeview North neighborhood, put it in the Lakeview South. Both chairs are agreeable to that. It makes a lot of sense in terms of how this neighborhood interacts with the neighborhoods closer to them. The next one is Sherwood Hills. This actually was brought to us by Mike Rohn. This building here to the base of a hill, it just makes more sense to have it in Edgemont rather up in Sherwood Hills. It fits more with the character and things that are going on down there. Again, all the chairs are in favor of that change. And perhaps the biggest one is that we have a downtown section that roughly runs this line here. And increasingly, we're getting more residential developments in there. The chair for the downtown zone or downtown neighborhood hasn't been very active. What we've talked about with the various neighborhoods is to just divide these 4 neighborhoods by University and Center Street. And then, of course, this is the grocery store. It's going to be part of Dixon. But the idea here is to give the neighborhoods more ability to interact with the residences that are being built into those zones, and also to have a better connection with the businesses in there, et cetera. So again, another unanimous proposal there, support for it. And so what we've done is, I believe we have an ordinance in the works to make those changes, and we're just asking for your direction to bring this to council in 2 weeks with
I do have a question about the downtown area.
Yeah.
I agree that there, we have some changes that are happening in downtown, especially with our chair that we've had in the past. And to say it all goes back into the residential, there's still a unique character with the downtown alliance that is.
Yeah, we intend to treat the downtown area as an overlay within it.
So there will be,
they still have representation as its own neighborhood, but effectively we would the major neighborhood is through the residential side. So we would have the downtown.
The character of that downtown is so unique that I don't want them to be considered again a second class to another neighborhood, because that is a very unique, important part of our town. I want them to have as much say. I don't want them to be left out.
Okay.
Well, in that regard, that's why we created the spot for a business vice chair. And in talking to Brady when he was still around, he felt constrained by these artificial boundaries because the people that he was working with in the business community didn't fit within this box necessarily. So he was fine with an overlay. Mr. Hardy?
I want to hear from Wayne. Is focused a lot. I know that there's a lot of changes that are happening right now in downtown Provo, Inc. And and I understand that Brady was okay. I'm comfortable with that, but I'm not sure that that a new representative would be.
So I think the two outlying ones, I think those are no-brainers. That makes sense. I don't feel, you said this also had unanimous support. Was that among chairs?
All the chairs that we talked to, from Dixon, Timp, Joaquin, Mazer, and Franklin, were all supportive of it.
Okay, because I've spoken with some that had some concerns. I think if we're comparing having the head of Downtown Inc. be the chair or this proposal, I like this proposal better than the having the Downtown Incorporated head be the chair, because that makes sense when it's a business, but I think an overlay makes a lot more sense, and have, you know, the business alliance be in charge of that overlay or whatever. But then as we get more and more residents, we need a resident to be elected by the residents to be the chair.
Hence, all the people living within the Timp neighborhood would do that, and with the overlay, there would still be someone representing the downtown businesses.
Yeah. No, and that makes sense. My concern is, I don't think it necessarily has to be this choice or that choice. I think, to me, the choice should be, should we keep it all as a downtown core representing the residents that live in this downtown core, and keep them together, and then have your business overlay take whatever it needs to take, but keep those residents together, because they kind of have a more similar experience, maybe similar voice.
It's my understanding that the residents in the downtown sector no longer felt represented.
Okay, I saw this one. Karen wants to weigh in here.
Only because I've been involved in these discussions for the last couple years, and even when Brady Curtis was here as part of Downtown Provo Inc., he knew he could not represent the residents, and he was actually in favor of the overlay idea, so he could focus on businesses and get notified of the appropriate things from various city departments. But the other problem is there has been no organization of the downtown area for residents. So if we want to keep it as its own distinct neighborhood, great, but you're going to probably have to hire someone to get out there and knock doors and, you know, really organize that effort, or put the money into a mailer or something. And a lot of those are new addresses that haven't existed before the last year or so. So we have a huge challenge. The nice thing about incorporating them into existing neighborhoods, well, Timp being the smallest neighborhood we have, becomes more substantial, but those neighborhoods are really well-established neighborhoods, and I think it's a little easier for them to reach out that extra couple blocks on each side. They did have concerns about, you know, what does this mean? Does this mean we have to work with the businesses more? And my answer was, it's residents who vote for neighborhood chairs and vice chairs, but we hope you're always having conversations with the businesses.
So I'm probably the only one in here who has had a neighborhood swear to destroy my business. And I'm highly in tune with the conflict that you have here. And I think it's not solved easily. I think you're probably on track towards the right decision, but the neighborhood is, by its nature, is going to be anti-business. It just is. And the businesses that exist today, that were there before these apartments were built and these residences were built, are going to be attacked by these very same apartment dwellers who have now been given a license to come after them. And what I mean by that is when they come before Planning Commission, when they come before you, that neighborhood chair is going to get deference to the overlay. And that's the second-class citizen, I think, that you're talking about. So I would encourage you to, I don't think you're wildly off track, but to keep studying this and find a model that works for a healthy, vibrant neighborhood, but doesn't set up an anti-business sentiment that these things all tend to do.
The intent was to only bring forward the items that were non-controversial, so I'd just suggest we pull this one out just for now to have some more discussion. Include
Speaking as a member of the downtown Provo board, there's been zero discussion about this at the board level. And I think it would be nice to let the board weigh in on this question. The other thing I think might be worth considering, and I try to think of how a new, let's take Liberty Center, for example, north of Center Street, right at the corner of 3rd West and Center. And one of my questions is, how much do they have in common with a dweller on 500 North and 300 West? Are their interests aligned, or are they not aligned? And I don't think we've asked the downtown residents that exist in the CBD today how they would feel about that. One other option might be to leave the downtown area what it is, but don't make the executive director of DPI the board or the neighborhood chair. Let them elect their own neighborhood chair, and let it be elected from the residents. You could continue to have DPI as a ex officio member of the neighborhood program if you wanted to do that. But I worry about the alignment of values, for someone who might be, many blocks away, but not on, for example, University Avenue or Center Street. Like, that creates a little different dynamic for a resident than maybe one that lives more on the interior of a neighborhood. So anyway, it might be worth the consideration of that as well.
That all sounds great. Mr. Kay?
So I'll just throw it out there. It's not one that's come to the surface yet, but there is a proposal by Scott Bowles to create a new neighborhood, carving it out of Franklin and move it out of Franklin South. The 5th West would be the boundary, and then it would take over all the way over to University, and it would carve out part of what is now the downtown neighborhood. And so he had his own reasons for doing that. You can say that someone on 1st North or Center Street is going to have probably little in common with someone up on 5th North, but the way it's set up right now, that's exactly what is happening. That's a huge neighborhood that's split by University and Center, which we normally don't do with neighborhoods. Have these big divides going through them. So that's why it was suggested that they all come together at the center point. And so,
I make a motion that we move the other neighborhood changes forward, and we take the downtown neighborhood versus the future studies.
Including carrying back from the downtown.
Now, let me just mention too, we'll talk about this a little more later today, but the downtown Provo Inc. board is in the process of kind of a reinvention discussion, and there's a substantial half-day retreat coming up in the next few days that will allow the board to consider some input from a comprehensive survey that's been done of the downtown stakeholders, and trying to rethink a little bit their role. And so, again, the only thing I'd suggest is maybe we could just be patient a little bit while they kind of go through kind of a reconstitution discussion about their role. Right. So again, but I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not sure in the next 30 or 60 days that the board will be ready to have this discussion, given that they need some time to kind of regroup. So again, that was my only comment, is it might be a 3-month process, not a 1-month process to get there.
That makes sense. Mr. Stewart, did you make a motion? I'm sorry, I was distracted for a minute.
Yes.
What was the motion?
Motion is that we move forward on the other neighborhood boundary changes except the downtown area, and that be put off for future study.
Okay, is there a second to that motion? Second by Mr. Harding. Any further discussion, considering we're about an hour behind now? If not, all in favor? Okay, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We're going to skip ahead to item number 9, which is a discussion regarding the appointment of temporary justice court judges, since Judge Romney is here with us now. So let's. Is he presenting, or are you presenting this item?
I think the judge is going to present.
Pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thank you. We were just, I'm sorry to be late. We were right in the middle of a jury trial. The jury just retired to deliberate, so we're waiting on that to see what happens. Thank you. Thanks to be here today. This is a simple matter. In times past, we have had 3 justice court judges appointed as temporary justice court judges to fill in when we have vacation time, when I'm at conferences, if I'm ill, that sort of thing. And we thought it good, be given schedules, that we appoint 2 more temporary justice court judges. They would be Judge Morgan Cummings and Judge Stephen Ridge of the Morgan Cummings and Lehigh Justice Court, Stephen Ridge of the Utah County Justice Court. Memo, I think, fairly points out we don't use them that often, but it's good to have a number of people we can choose from because of their schedules and because of our schedules. And I believe that I understand that the joint resolution of the council and mayor can be prepared appointing these judges, and it was my recommendation in this memo that I drafted that be done. So I'm happy to answer any questions that I might have about that.
Do we have any currently appointed?
We have 3. There's Judge Festermaker, Judge Colmore, and Judge Reed Parkin. Festermaker's from Springville, Colmore from Utah County, and Reed Parkin from Orem. And it would be my recommendation they be reappointed, and maybe 2 others be appointed as well.
Thank you. If there's no objection, council leadership will plan on scheduling this for the next available council meeting. If we're ready, will we be ready? Is that agreeable? All right, thank you very much.
May we be excused?
Yes, you may. Thank you very much. Let's jump back to item number 7, which is a continuing discussion on parking ratio adjustments. Mr. Pepperoni, do you have any updates for us on how those discussions are going?
My comments will be brief, and then we can just take whatever time you think is necessary. Planning staff brought forward these proposed amendments to parking ratios in 3 scenarios due to some problems we've experienced recently with spillover parking. Since the last time we met a couple of weeks ago, I suggested a further modification to what you saw a few weeks ago. And Brian Jones and I talked through that and added that to the ordinance and resolution. Basically, what it amounts to is the amendments that I proposed would allow for a 25% reduction still in the ITOD zone. If the city council thinks that that would be appropriate to also extend to the downtown zone, staff would not be opposed to that. But if a parking break like that is permitted, there are other sections of our code that also allow for reductions in parking. And without this language that we added, I became concerned that between the 25% reduction you may have permit, plus other reductions that are permitted elsewhere in the code, we could be right back to having parking at less than 1 space per unit in a residential development, which puts us right back to where we started this discussion. So the sentence added to the amendment, the sentence added simply closes the door to that possibility. Keep going a little further. Yeah, right. Keep going. So it's just no other provision starting there. No other provision of Provo City Code that purports to reduce or modify parking requirements may operate to reduce minimum parking requirements below the requirement provided in this section. So we close that door. I've received input from 2 developers since we last met. I'll go into those in more detail in the public hearing tonight. I don't think either developer will be present tonight, but they're very opposite points of view. Both have built downtown projects, downtown Salt Lake projects. Both own thousands of apartment units. One feels that parking at less than 1-to-1 is important. The other one insists they would not build at less than 1-to-1 and have not so far built less than 1-to-1. Again, I'll go into those in more detail in the meeting. But that's all I had. That's the only update I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to respond.
I don't know if you were here earlier. I was just up in Orem today, and there's a new project called the Boulevard, and I believe it's about 1.5. And we also hear that the things going into Orem are market rate. So if they're attracting market rate and their standard's 1.5, I don't see why we can't do the same, or, with the parking space.
One of the answers to that question is land cost.
Well, and we are, in some places, making a concession here, and that's what's recommended by Planning Commission.
So what does the 25, oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're.
The 25%, what does that bring us to? We were at 0.7.
So the 25% doesn't apply to student housing.
Nope. Okay, that's just.
Student housing ratio is
correct,
0.7,
okay.
we're proposing.
So where are we in the downtown right now? 1 point?
So the downtown requires 1.5 for one bedroom and 2.25 for two or more bedrooms. But you can take 50% off of that. And that's how Startup Crossing ended up with a ratio of 0.75 per unit. They took full advantage of the 50% break. So with the 25% break, for one bedroom, you'd be at 1.15, and for a two bedroom, you'd be at 1.69. Okay. In these downtown areas, they're going to build many more one bedroom units than two bedroom units. But I think the 1.15 still gets us where we need to be. Protects us. Because that would be resident parking and visitor parking both.
Okay, so the two thoughts are that, remember, these are parking minimums, and so there's nothing that says that, hey, someone that wants to build boulevards and we say it needs to be 1.15, they still should be understanding market, and maybe they say, well, for the people we're trying to attract, 1.5 makes a lot more sense. It just gives flexibility. Now that flexibility can be abused, and I think once we have a parking manager and hopefully some on-street parking management, then we're not subsidizing people pushing, basically not providing what's needed and pushing them out onto the street. So I think these things are coming into place or whatever. So I'm hoping if we do these kind of things with the idea that this is temporary until we get some of these other systems in place. The other thought that I had on it was that last time we talked about, potentially instead of saying this is the limit, it's this is the limit, but it can be brought down if you do these things. And when I look at this proposal, this nothing can bring it below the 75. I don't know what those other things are, but if those other things are that, hey, if you will do this, then we're willing to back off. It sounds like we're going the opposite. We're actually taking out some of those incentives for kind of the pros on the, if you will do these things that will make it so you don't need as much parking. Or, if it's a mixed use and so your parking spots are going to be used by different people during the day, now you can reduce it 20% or whatever. It seems like we may be taking out those incentives rather than, and I'd rather the approach of, maybe our minimum is going to be higher, but there's these performance reductions that are available. I'd rather go to a smarter, what I would think is a smart solution rather than just a.
I agree completely with what Mr. Harding is saying. To me, I'm seeing this as kind of a stopgap to keep us from getting another project that's less than 1-to-1 right now. When a parking coordinator is hired, I think we need to work with that parking coordinator. Planning needs to work with the parking coordinator and bring forth a more comprehensive solution, because there are several things that need to be dealt with. One is we have existing parking ratios that, in my opinion, need to be tweaked. We do a lot of parking ratios based on gross square footage. So we're asking people to park hallways, stairwells, mechanical rooms, bathrooms. That's very rare. That's unusual. You ask people to park on net square footage. So parking ratio still needs to be looked at. The idea of you can get a break if you'll do things that show you're trying to be more walkable, more transit oriented, those types of things. Those are what other communities have done and have found some success with. Now, on the one hand, as much as I would advocate that, I would also say if you do a lot of those things and do them really well, you'll lower trip generation by 25 or 30%, which would be great in our environment and our climate. That would be great. But how many people will give up a car simply because they're driving less? They're willing to walk more or bike more. Will they really give up a car? And that's one of the comments of the one Salt Lake developer saying their experience is people will drive less in the right environment, but they won't give up that car. So they still need a place to park it. They still need a place to store it. And that's why they won't go less than 1-to-1. But I think it's a good idea that with this parking coordinator, we take a more comprehensive look at on-street parking enforcement. Several aspects of this that we haven't dealt with in these amendments.
I'd just like to compliment staff for your hard work on this, and I do look forward to the parking coordinator. I totally agree.
Thank you.
Mayor, how is parking coordinator coming? I know that where we got
We're closing this one up for just a recheck.
So we're gonna have 2 public discussions in this one tonight and then a vote in 2 weeks. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss with Mr. Pepperoni prior to that?
Can you just clarify, sorry, there's 25% reduction in all 3 zones, ITOD, DT1, DT2, no, ITOD.
The staff recommendation was just in the
Just
ITOD.
in the ITOD, but you said you could possibly do it in DT1, DT2 as well.
Yes, that would not offend staff in any way.
I'm not
Aren't
sure.
they already at 25%? Well, isn't that something they already have the option of reducing by 25%?
In the downtown zones, they have that option of 50% reduction. The downtown zones have
So
to a 25% reduction.
The previous recommendation didn't say it, back it up to 25, okay.
There's actually 2 versions of the ordinance. I think they probably both made an aside. So the regular version allows a 25% reduction in ITOD and no reduction in DT1 and DT2, which is actually then a 50% increase, right? I mean, it eliminates the potential to go down to 50. The alternate version changes the current 50% reduction to a 25% reduction.
In ITOD, downtown 1 and downtown 2. So we prepared ordinances for both scenarios. Should you want to give you flexibility to either one.
Thank you, Mr. Pepperoni.
Thank you.
Mr. Holmes, if you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a second.
Right.
Special issues. Yep.
Don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball. So this ordinance, I hope you would see it as kind of like our downtown. It's in motion. I think Mayor Curtis has pointed out very appropriately that with BRT coming, these are the best knowledge that we have right now on what we know and who knows where this is going. And so this ordinance is not the end all be all for parking ever, right? And so we shouldn't fall in love with it, that it's going to solve all of our problems, because every project that's already built, it's not going to affect those. It's going to affect a set of projects, and we will probably know in the future how well we did. And we've been doing that since we've been doing zoning in Provo, how well we did. And that would be the only comment, that we're comfortable with this. And as Mr. Pepperoni pointed out, 2 very reputable developers had to complete different perspectives on this, on how they would approach it. And again, so it's just, we're doing the best that we can, and we'll see how it works. And we may need to tweak it again, and we will find out quickly. And as developers come in and say, this is just not working for me, and if we have enough of those, then we may need to make a change. And if we're not hearing anything, then they're able to do projects. We're seeing the cranes in the sky still, and it's like, hey, we might have hit it. So it's not a science, as much as we'd like it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
So you're supporting all 3 zones?
I'm in support of what Bill was suggesting. I'm sorry, I didn't follow every little nuance of that. So what Q development director?
Here's the original recommendation and then the modified one. The modified one, which was to treat DT1 and DT2 the same as the let's move on to item number 8, which is a discussion on an appropriation for vote by mail, which will be presented by Mr. Porter.
Thank you, Chair Sewell and the council. I apologize, Janine Weiss is out this week, and so I'm substituting for her. But this is something that's come up. I want to just talk briefly about vote by mail. I know we've had some discussions with you about this in the past, but if we go to the first slide, this was something that was done. Looks like I'm the one that's driving, so I need to be better. Back in 2015, there was a Dan Jones survey on the public's perception of vote by mail, and it was really positive. 49% strongly supported, and there were 30% that somewhat supported it. So there is a good support by the public about this initiative, and I think as in our last election, which has been well, this was just after our last election, but I think overall the tide is turning more towards vote by mail. If you go to the next slide, let's see if I can get this work here. There we go. This just kind of shows what our voter turnout has been back to 1999. And you'll notice that 2007 was really strong, and that's when the school voucher election was there, so it created a lot of interest. Also in 2005, we had a road bond election, but the last 3 or 4 elections, we've varied roughly around 18 to 15%. And there's a general sense out there that vote by mail typically will approximately double or even better your results. So you would have, we could see some significant improvements, and particularly back to 2011, we had 8.82%. So I think there's some general support there. One of the principal reasons that we're coming to you today is that we just received notification within the last month that the county has decided that they are going to no longer provide the electronic voting machines, and that they are going to administer by option for each of the cities that belong to the county a vote by mail for the upcoming election. And they provided us with some numbers, and their numbers kind of vary based on the number of cities that participate. And Janine's kind of done a little bit of polling, and this is a fairly conservative number, but we think based on the cities that are most likely to participate that we will be approximately 170,000 if we do vote by mail with Utah County. If we did it on our own, which primarily is higher because our posted rates are higher and we lose some of the efficiencies, we'd be about 183,000. And if we went out and rented our own optical scan machines, and due to the fact that the poll workers, their wages across the area have gone up significantly, and renting equipment, we would actually be about 180. And so of those 3 options right now, the vote by mail with Utah County administering it is the cheapest. Just for your information, in 2015, our last election, our election costs were $74,000. So it's up pretty significantly. In 2013, they were $69,000. And so, but based on where we're at, the landscape's changed, and we think there's going to be some great benefits by going with vote by mail. And so with this large increase in costs, this is one of the things that administration is recommending. We've tried in the past to budget each year for election costs so that we have a huge hit one year and then we don't have a hit the next. We want to be able to plan and prepare and set up our budget so that we are accounting for it each year. And so we have $20,500 that was carried over that we're going to apply. And so if we go to the next, let's see here. Here we go. We're actually going to come right to here. So what we're recommending is we have the estimated cost is $170, and it may come in less than that. And if it did, what we would do is we would just leave that money in the elections and carry it over to another year. But we're conservative. We think the 170, half of that would be 85. We currently have 20,500 that we've carried over. And so what we're proposing is that we do an appropriation of 64,500 out of fund balance, and then we would budget for the other 85,000 in the upcoming budget to handle the vote by mail election coming up in this fall. I would also just mention that it does cover the vote by mail for both the primary election and the general election. We will also have a voting center, and we think it's likely that that would be at the rec center, so that on election day for both the primary and the general election, if people wanted to, they could come vote. And we also plan to be conservative and have plenty of staff so that if we were to get larger demand than expected, that we'd be prepared for that. We're also, and Mayor, you may want to mention a couple of things that you're looking at as far as for voter awareness and some of the things that we're doing to try to help educate the public.
Yes, we launched voteprovo.com today, and currently it gives all of the information somebody needs to know about filing and running and things like that. And we're very aware that this will involve a large education process for our residents, and so we'll go full court on informing them. I was a little worried because of what happened up in Salt Lake last election cycle with the long lines.
3-hour line.
Yeah, 3-hour lines. And there will be no attempt, financially it's just impossible to try to keep all the polling locations open around the city. Previously there were options, but that's actually a little bit of advantage because we put all of our resources into one location in the rec center and make sure we're prepared for an unknown amount of people that might come in that day and vote. I think another positive thing is when we looked at this a couple of years ago, one of the main reasons I didn't want to move forward with it is because the county wasn't going to do it. So you could get into the cycle where every other year you were voting by mail and every other year you were not voting by mail. And that seems very confusing to me. So I think it's significant now that the county is moving in this direction. They haven't said that they'll do it on their year, but the implication is that they'll do it on their year. Which I think now we're in the reverse position. If we don't do vote by mail, we're putting our residents in that position of going every other year, which would be very, very confusing to them.
The other thing that Janine mentioned to me is that the school district has raised some concerns about having polling places at the schools and bringing in people, and there's some concerns about security and with the students. And so by going to like the rec center and no longer needing to use the schools for those polling places, that would make them very pleased and would be another positive. The other thing that I would mention is that we did just find out this recently, and the county has asked us that we provide them our official notice by the 3rd of April. And so that's one of the reasons that we came to the council and we're asking them to act relatively quickly so that we can be prepared for that. Yes.
Will you still have early voting, and would that be at the rec center?
Early voting, I don't think so, because we'll be sending out those vote by mail.
Early voting will now be by mail.
By mail.
Want to vote early, you put it in the box.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay, and the other question is, it seems like the prices have doubled or more. Why? In such a short period of time.
Well, well, I would say a couple things. Vote by mail is more expensive just clearly because of postage. I mean, you are sending to all of the registered voters, you are sending them a ballot twice, once for the primary and the other for the general. You also have to manage and maintain this voting center, okay? And so those are the primary reasons why the vote by mail is more expensive. Why our other options gone up so much is, number one, we're not getting the efficiencies and benefits that we have with the county. Number two, the cost of poll workers over the last 10 years have been increasing dramatically. And one of the things that makes it challenging is that our surrounding communities have been increasing to attract poll workers to come, and so we pretty much have to match that. And then we also have to go out and rent machines and bring them on and run through the whole process. And so regardless, those are the reasons that it's gone up so significantly, and I don't like it. I mean, it's been nice to be where we've been and it's worked, but I think we're going to get a much better product as a result of vote by mail, and we're just so encouraged that the county's decided to administer it, and so I think that'll be a real positive.
So what are other cities doing?
Well, most of the larger cities are all on board. It's some of the smaller cities that are still kind of on the fence, not sure what they're going to do. And so, but Lehigh and Orem and most of the others, I've actually got, and I could get that for you to let you know who it is that we're expecting to participate, but I don't have it right here with me, but I can get it for you.
If there's state officers, governors and those things and county officers, would we have to, if we don't do this, would we have to do it twice? Or I mean, would we have to do it in person and a vote by mail if they're all going to do that?
But that's what happened last time, because we had a statewide, something, what did we do?
I do remember that now.
Yeah, on the municipal election, there was actually a statewide referendum, and I can't remember what it was now, but, and the county came back initially and said, well, you run your vote by mail election cities if that's what you want to do, but we're going to still do our traditional show up at the polling place. And the cities went ballistic about that and said, well, number one, why are we spending so much money? Number two, why can't you just do vote by mail? And at the end of the day, what they came back with was said, okay, we'll just put our stuff on your ballot if you're going to do vote by mail. Otherwise, we'll run our traditional election, and then we'll count the ballot separately so that we can keep track of what's legitimate ballot and what's not. And so now with the county moving in this direction, I think, again, we run the risk that if there were a statewide issue, we would be voting twice, right? And I don't think anybody wants to do that. And so yeah, so I think that's been a risk historically, but given that the county is now appearing to shift to a vote by mail technology, I think it's going to.
But it seems like now, if we don't, then we're
the ones causing it.
Right.
The county has told us that they haven't made a 100% sure decision that they're going to be vote by mail over the long term. I believe they will, and we think it's expected that they're taking this first experience as a little bit of, let's see how it goes, let's work through it, but I'm sure it'll be successful, but just want to make sure that you're aware that this is the first year and they're kind of trying to see how it goes and make a determination, but they definitely are doing it this fall and for the fall election, and we would like to have the council make action on this item on the 21st so that before we give them our official intent on April 3rd, that we know we've got the funding prepared and that the council administration's in agreement and support of it.
I don't understand, John. Sounds like you're asking us to vote for one thing. I think we should be able to vote for whether we want to do vote by mail or we want to do vote by ballot.
Yeah, and if you wanted to include that.
I do want to include because I'm not in favor of vote by mail.
Okay.
I don't think you give us an option, which I don't appreciate.
What are some of the things
that your test? And I think if the opportunity for fraud and vote by mail is greater than proven to be. I saw what happened in Salt Lake County. Having one voting location, I think it's going to be a disaster. You're going to have long lines, people are very unhappy. And I think to think that we can't actually go to a place to vote, we can't even put that effort forth, bothers me. Maybe I'm old school. I am old school, without question.
So let me clarify for council staff. So as I understand it, John, what you're saying is that you're going to need an appropriation either way, and that the administration's recommendation is that that the council appropriate enough money for the vote by mail. So based on Councilmember Stewart's comment, it sounds like there might be a need for staff to prepare two resolutions, one that appropriates enough money for vote by mail and one that appropriates enough money for the other. Okay.
Do we have anything that we learned from Orem did? If they did it last year, are there things that we learned that were mistakes that were challenging that they, so we'd like to do things different or we don't like what happened? What did they learn from their experience?
I'm sure there's lessons that we could learn, and I'm sure that if Janine were here, she could do a better job than me because she probably had some discussions with their recorder. But I'm certain that there's some of those things, and I think that the fact that we waited till this election and didn't go last election, there'll be some things that we'll learn and benefit from there. But as far as specifics, unless Wayne or the mayor, you're aware of something.
Now, I can tell you the perspective of talking to people in Orem about it was they absolutely loved the vote by mail. They didn't have any of the challenges that you confronted in Salt Lake. And again, I think if you talk to the Salt Lake County clerk, what she will tell you is that the feedback they had from voters was because it was the presidential election and because of the kinds of options we had available to us in the presidential election, that the landscape was changing daily up until the election. There were a lot of people who decided not to vote early, who simply waited until election day to do that. And by that point, then it was either drop it in the mail or take it to the post office to ensure that it was postmarked the day of the election, or go to the central voting location and do that. And they said she felt that was, Sherry Swenson said that it's a total anomaly. It's not happened before. We've done several elections with vote by mail and we haven't had that issue before. So I think extraordinarily high voter turnout and a very high level of voter confusion about the presidential race created a perfect storm for them. That was her take on it.
We could also, in 2 weeks, if you make the decision to move it to the action agenda when Janine's here, we could have her prepared to respond specifically to that question. Yes, David?
So, Mr. Stewart, I am also a bit old school. But I do think that this is the way it's going. I don't think, before it could be in the vanguard, but now, I mean, we'll be trailing if we don't do this. And I think this is the direction it is going. So, I'll be interested to look at the options, but I imagine that I'll be voting for this vote by mail. But two things. One, I want to take, maybe a moment of silence or a moment of mourning.
Yes.
I do think that gathering, I love interacting with my neighbors as we go in. It cuts across religious lines. It cuts across all lines. The community gathers together in a place and exercises their civic duty. I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think, we may not give that enough value of what we're losing when we go to vote by mail by that. There are definitely advantages for vote by mail. One other thing you said is we get a better product. We can always measure voter turnout. It's an easy thing to measure. And if our only objective is voter turnout, this is a great thing. But if we're looking for more informed voters, high percentage of informed voters, I think there's advantages to this, but there's also disadvantages. And so, when you say a better product, it may just be, it's very hard to measure what's your participation rate of informed voters. That you can't really measure that, but you can measure voter turnout. That'll go up, but I'm not certain that we are necessarily getting a better product.
I do like it though that if you're voting on Proposition A and you're doing it at home and all of a sudden you say, I'm not sure what that is, and you spend an hour or two and do some research and then go back and vote, you may get a better decision there.
I agree. There's definitely some advantages there.
Yeah.
But we could be like Australia. We could make it compulsory voting, but that does not necessarily mean, and we'll have great turnout, great voter participation. But if people don't care enough to take the 10 minutes to go down to the voting station, then anyway.
And I am one that still goes and votes because I want to wear the sticker and things like that. So I'm with you. But the flip side of that is we're trying to engage a generation that doesn't understand that they have to go on a prescribed time to a prescribed location or their vote doesn't count. If I get a trip for work and have to travel on that day, I can't vote. And you're really eliminating a section of our population. It's hard for seniors that don't have access to transportation. The ability to vote after I've studied the issues in my home when I'm ready to cast that ballot, I think makes me a far more informed voter. And I think the people that are not informed probably aren't going to. I mean, some of them will, but they're still not going to vote. That's why you double it. You still get 60% that aren't voting.
The nice thing in my personal life is that it will spread out the number of people who call me and say, who should I vote for? Because I won't get them all the week before election day. There's an advantage. I never answer that question. The other thing you can ask a lot.
The other thing I would say in response to Councilman Stewart's question and concern is that our intent was to come to you and get your support of vote by mail. And so I just want to let you know that was the intent. And we want to do the appropriation, but we kind of felt like by giving you the opportunity to make the decision on the appropriation, you were also making the decision on vote by mail. And I think having a separate resolution associated with that is a great request.
I will say I've done it both ways. I prefer to vote by mail for the reasons that I think you expressed, to be able to do some research ahead of time and things like that. And it tends to give people more flexibility. But one thing that, that people running for council will have to do a little differently is that they had better have a decent web link that tells about who they are, because that's how people are researching them now. And I believe you mentioned in your director's meeting this morning that the intent with the city's website is to allow for a portal for the various candidates to link to, so that people can research them.
Just like to throw in one other thing here, it's too late in the afternoon and too late in the election cycle to really discuss this, but I think for the same reasons that have been mentioned, it would be really interesting to explore online voting. If that has been proven to be secure, I don't kind of know for sure where we're at, but in terms of cost and participation.
I think a lot of people feel like that's where it's going to end up, but I think there's still security concerns right now. Sure would save a lot of the cost too, and a lot of the mail and a lot of other things.
Talking about that younger generation, there are so many who say, look, I can buy a car online, I can refinance my house online.
But I'm too lazy to walk down to the voting booth.
How on earth can't you figure out how I can vote online?
As a technologist, I feel like there's got to be a solution to that. I haven't studied it.
Direction of staff then is to come back with 2 possible resolutions or 2 options.
The 2 options, the vote by mail option
The optical scan.
Optical scan.
That's the only other
Be
option.
computer voting like normal. The county won't do that for us.
Couldn't we have done in the work, we move forward one or the other? Part of this meeting itself, move forward one or the other.
You could, I mean, if someone wanted to make a motion now, you could make the decision now as to which one you want us to bring forward, or we can bring both resolutions. I mean, really, the only thing that's going to change is the number, because it's really just a matter of how much you appropriate. Because you
I
have
should say it's being appropriated for PML.
Yep.
Yeah.
For that
deadline, yeah, we'll need, we'll need to get.
And that part for either one is really just an insertion. We could insert either one. We'll fill it up with 2 options and bring that. My suspicion is that no matter what we go forward with,
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to say. I imagine there's a lot of public interest in this, and regardless of what we decide today, probably want to hear from them at the next meeting. Well, actually, that does bring up a question. If we only had one of the resolutions ready, could we vote on the other one at that time, or would we need to have them both prepared in advance?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd have to notice both. Yeah.
Yeah.
either that or notice the one with the higher number. I think
if you notice one with the higher number, you'd be okay.
Dustin and I can figure out how to do the noticing, so we're only noticing one item. I don't think that's a problem. Yeah, that won't be a problem.
So what's your preference? Are you okay to put them, have them both ready, or one with the higher number?
Covers both.
Covers both. And then we'll vote in the meeting as to which. Okay. All right, it doesn't appear there's any objection to that, so.
This might be a really good open city hall issue to put up and take a couple of weeks of public comment there, as well as other methods. But nice thing about open city hall is you can do a pro and con list and put together some thoughts, share some web links of what's out there, and do a little video and get some feedback.
So I already, when I shared your updates for this week, I prefaced that, I don't know if you saw, I asked people in my district what they thought about voting by mail. And I didn't really give them a pro and con. I tried to make it pretty short, sweet, and objective, just to feel them out. And I did get people responding back, and even though I didn't bring up voter fraud, some people brought that up, and I just simply said I'm okay the way that it is. I like going down to a meeting, standing in line with my neighbors. So I'm getting some feedback there, and I think if you did a pro and con, you would want to bring up the things that people would want to consider. And you know, cost is one of them, but being informed and making an effort, for me, that's kind of huge. I maybe because I'm not a millennial, I take exception to everything being electronic. And as much as I use this thing, I probably overuse it. When I see people that just are, this is their whole life. And we're actually, the church is looking at banning certain websites in the churches. Because we were given a report the other day, the top 3 websites that people use at church, and it's not ancestry.com or Family Search.
ESPN.
YouTube, ESPN, absolutely. It's supposed to be banned so that people can actually go to church for the right reason. But anyway, so I think there's a lot to be said about having a discussion.
Right, thanks, Mr. Corrigan.
Thank you.
Do we need a motion on this, or should we just, okay, I think we're clear on what you want us to do as far as we move forward. Mayor, are you okay if we put you off again?
Perfect. Let me report in leadership, and then you guys can decide if it even, because we're going back to council meeting.
Okay, great. We've got a lot to cover in the closed session, so so we need a motion.
So so I understand it'd be a motion to discuss the competency and other issues with respect to people under consideration by the board or by the council for appointment to a board.
Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, so the motion is to, well, we usually have Brian make a comment. Brian? Yeah, we need to adjourn and go into closed session.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure we had, that Dustin and I were on the same page with our noticing deadlines. We do have, as far as I know, only one item for. Okay.
It's not the one you're thinking.
It's not the one I'm thinking.
Yeah, that includes the one.
Okay, so, property?
The 2 that I'm thinking of, one's a threatened lawsuit, and the other is competency.
Okay. Oh, okay. So we do have 3 items. All of them, I know what they're now. So all of them do fall within the statutory exceptions for character and competency of an individual, or reasonably imminent litigation, or sale and or acquisition of property. So it'd be appropriate to have a closed meeting on those items.
Thank you. So I'll look for a motion to move to close the meeting. And seconded by Mr. Hardy. All in favor?
Seconded by Mr.
Van. Seconded your own motion. Sorry. All in favor? Thank you. We'll reconvene in